Welcome to the Brewer Fanatic podcast. We have a special edition for you today. I am Spencer Michaelis, and I am not joined by Jack Stern today. Instead, I'm going to be joined by Joseph Zarr. He's over at Brewer Fanatic, not one of our writers per se, but he writes minor league recaps not every day, but most days during the season throughout an entire minor league season. We're really excited. We're going to bring a little bit of a minor league recap of the entire season to you guys. It's going to come over the course of a few different episodes. Today, we're going to start with kind of a recap of the entire minor league season. We're going to talk about recent transactions, meaning after the season ended, some of the releases we've seen, some of the players who've opted out and are going to hit minor league free agency. And then we're also going to talk about some of the guys that we lost during the season that we saw released or traded. We're going to talk about Arizona Fall League updates, winter ball updates. We've got some Rule 5 protection news to go through. Then we're going to do our whole overview of what happened during the minor league season, meaning records-wise, how teams performed, what we saw in the postseason from some of the teams. We will finish it off with a couple of exercises in tiering players. So we're going to tier not all, but the quote unquote prospects at the DSL and the Arizona Complex League level. We're going to give you some other players of note, and we'll answer some of your questions throughout. But before we get into any of that, Joseph, want to give a little introduction to yourself, and how are you doing tonight?
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks, Spencer. It's been a long day. The farm day is always kind of a long day. But hey, I farm and I talk about the Brewers farm. So it's two of my favorite things. And to your point, I write the minor league link reports twice a week, typically alongside Jim Goulart and Ro Mueller on the website. Daniel, his kids call him Ro, and we kind of do a triumvirate teamwork throughout the whole season. And essentially, from late March through September, we are writing reports every day covering all of the games. So it's extensive, and it is, if I'm honest, pretty exhausting, but it's awesome. And we love it. And tying into that, we have talked just briefly before we decided to do this podcast. I just want to kind of set the table for the greater Brewer fandom that we are in what I perceive to be the golden era of Brewers baseball. And I think covering the minor leagues, especially with where we're headed in this offseason, I think we are in the midst of just an unbelievable period of time to cover the minor leagues across the system. And I see it personally as one of the key lifebloods of the entire organization. And it's an organization that Matt Arnold has come out and talked about the people and the culture, and the minor leagues is just such a core component. And now that they have the Dominican Academy, we're seeing the fruits of a massively improved international recruiting process and program at large. And we're seeing that trickle impact into Arizona and into the lower levels. And from the vantage point of potentially, and well, actually losing the Diamond broadcast deal, these prospects who historically have gotten us amazing players, let alone become amazing players, are now becoming perhaps even more important. So it's exciting to share these players with you all, because from my own vantage point, and Spencer knows because I occasionally message him from time to time, there's just so many interesting players to talk about and so many interesting players to cover in a season. And I'm excited that we can point to our minor league forum because we have so many cool topics there. And I hope people visit after we do our little 5-parter. So without further ado, let's just get into it. I'm ready.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. I guess before we get into too much of it, I will note, if you are listening to this podcast, this might be one of the ones that you would love to check out on the YouTube channel. We're going to have a little bit more going on than we normally do over there. Some graphics, easier to follow along. We're going to be naming a lot of people, so it might be a little bit easier to see them on your screen and be able to remember who we're talking about at all times. And then also we're going to show some video of some of the players as we get through some of the tiering of some of these DSL and ACL players. And There's not always a ton of video out there. We've gathered what we can, but it'll give you a chance to kind of check out some of those guys and see what everybody's excited about and why you should be excited about some of these guys. So starting off, we're going to go through, like I mentioned, we're going to do a little bit of a transactional recap of what we've seen so far this offseason, beginning on the players who elected free agency. So these are players who had run out of club control in the minor leagues. Some of them were players who have signed 1-year minor league deals in the past. Some of them are players who have been in the organization their whole career, and their organizational clock came to an end this offseason. So I'll list some of these guys off, and then Joseph, I'm going to let you talk about whoever you want to talk about from.
Boy,
and I know you've got notes.
Oh, I'm just looking at this list, and I mean, I can wax poetic on every one of these players. I'm telling you, just even looking at this list right here, that is a lot of quality minor league players right there. Despite what fans might know or think, I've seen a lot of good playing from these guys. So anyhow, go ahead.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So starting on the position player side, we will no longer see these players in the organization, barring them re-signing, which isn't out of the question. But for now, infielder Patrick Dorian has elected free agency. Catcher Andy Yerzy has. Outfielder Chris Roller, who we saw in the majors. Some of you are a little bit more familiar with him, probably. Catcher Francisco Mejia, who at one point was almost a Brewer in the Jonathan Lucroy trade before that got turned around, and then he still was almost a Brewer again, this time in AAA. Jake Bauers, who everyone, I assume, knows Jake Bauers pretty well. Funny enough, one of his final plate appearances as a Brewer was a huge home run in the playoffs. Unfortunately, it didn't end up doing what we wanted it to do, but it was still a kind of a cool way for him to seemingly end his Brewers career, I guess. We've got outfielder Carlos D. Rodriguez, not the pitcher that we saw in the majors this year. We have catcher Brian Navarretto. We have utility man Felix Valerio, outfielder Lamar Sparks, and Connor Scott, and righty Mercado. And then first baseman Jesus Chirinos and second baseman Jose Acosta. So, Joseph, anybody you want to highlight there? You can talk about all of them if you want, or a few of them, but whatever you want to do.
I'm gonna lead unorthodox. I'm gonna lead from behind the plate. I'm gonna go right to my guy, known that it's my guy, Brian Navarretto. Navs.
Oh yeah.
That young man gave so many quality innings to the Sounds over the last 2 seasons, and I think that's a player right there who I feel like in the greater pantheon of minor league baseball and Brewers baseball that fans might take for granted. But when you watch the games as often as I do, and I track that, and I've talked about it in the forums this year, I've watched the most games I've ever watched. Brian Navarretto, if you looked at his raw offensive numbers, you would think, oh, here's a guy who's hitting 180, 220. But his ability to have opportune pokes with men on base in key situations is uncanny for a guy who generally doesn't hit all that well. So he's a gamer in every sense, and an incredible defender, incredible cannon to second and third base, just keeps the base runners honest. And I just know that manager Rick Sweet's going to miss him. And so much so that if you recall, I think it was 2022, if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is going off the top of my head, but when they were in the championships in Vegas playing Durham, if you recall, they opted to start Navarretto behind home plate. And a lot of fans were surprised at that juncture. I was not. I watched him the whole season. I said, that if you need somebody to catch a game clean and maybe give you a key hit, he's your guy. So I'm going to miss Navarretto. And frankly, I hope he's back. I really do. I think Carlos Rodriguez at one time before the whole Churio influx of talent there, Cargo, before his knee injury at Wisconsin, he was one of the top young outfielders. And if I recall, he was in the top 20 in a lot of the prospect rankings. Yeah. And he's just a guy that he almost won Rookie of the Year last year in the winter leagues. He was in second there. He hits wherever he goes. He gets on base. He has a really keen sense of the strike zone. He covers a lot of ground in the outfield, but that's kind of where I think the Brewers might see him as a replaceable player, frankly. The arm isn't that great, and that'll probably be an area where he'll want to improve going forward. I think the same to Chris Roller. We saw him in Milwaukee. He had an incredible last month at Nashville. Incredible defender. can cover so much ground. I saw him crash into the wall on more than one occasion, come away with the ball. He had a little power surge. He's a streaky hitter. We didn't see catcher Andy Yerzy really, but maybe a game, if I'm not mistaken. He got promoted to Nashville. I don't know if he was doing the glorified Metzinger role as the bullpen catcher. I don't know what happened. It kind of felt like a lost season. And it's a skilled player. We just didn't get to see him. Patrick Dorian, incredibly versatile defender, really struggled at the plate for the beginning of the year. I think he may have been 0 for 43 at one point to start his season. But, he's another guy that all of these guys at any given point in time, they can get hot. We saw it the summer before, and he just gave us some really good baseball then. And then something happened at the plate. I think maybe he lost some confidence, unfortunately, but he'll latch on somewhere. He'll give meaningful innings. Lamar Sparks, arguably, we are losing the best arm in the entire system from the outfield.
Yeah.
The cannons he unleashed in Biloxi, you're talking flat-footed, one-arm cannon rope to home plate to nab runners. It was he was electric. And a little strikeout heavy, but he was streaky. He gave meaningful hits. Second half, as they did their playoff push, he gave great ABs, and for a while, he was the best hitter. Connor Scott, I think, for what he gave as an in-season signing, I was sad to see him go because he got injured, came back for the playoffs, but he was a key player for the Shuckers and skilled player. And Righty Mercado was interesting in that he was one of the first promotees to high A, if you remember, and then he got called back to low A, kind of like Jader Arenamo was originally called up. He never really got his legs under him, never really got a lot of playing time, but also wasn't really that productive. So hopefully he'll develop and latch on somewhere. And then I would, Jose Acosta, he is the soldier. He would go anywhere. Great clubhouse guy. Managers loved him. Kind of strictly a second baseman, kind of a glue guy at this stage of his career, but love his attitude, lefty. And then I'm going to end with Jesus Chirinos there. I thought Jesus Chirinos, when given opportunities, actually really excelled this year at Wisconsin. He was in better shape, still has a little power pop. I thought he really filled the bill when, Taden Hall was down injured a little bit. They were needing coverage over at first base. And I think, kind of as a numbers game, unfairly, perhaps he just didn't get the playing time that perhaps he deserved. But I think he's still got potential in that tank. The only thing there is it's just defense is going to have to evolve. It's just going to have to because he's a little limited there. But the power will be there. It'll be interesting. He has this tendency when he swings to pull his head out and kind of lift that back leg. And I do wonder over time if he can't calm that down. But like I said, all of these guys gave great. And I don't want to forget Felix Valerio, who at one point in time was our little Altuve guy where we were like, maybe he'll do it. And I remember when Joe Aralt was managing down at Wisconsin, he waxed poetic about how he and Zavi Warren would share tips on hitting, and he just never could get the consistency at Biloxi. And they tried him in left field. Clearly, he's going to have limitations there. I think that's fair to say. But there's still a lot of gas in that tank, and I hope he can latch on somewhere. I really do. So that would be my little
absolutely
synopsis.
Yeah, Chirinos, all I remember from this year, the biggest thing I remember is his homer off of a rehabbing Yu Darvish over
just
the center field batter
out of that. I mean, that was a moment. That was a moment.
Yeah.
Oh man, was that at the Tin Caps?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Yeah, he crushed it way over the batter's eye. Just an absolute bomb.
It was such a moment. I remember that like it was yesterday. Yeah, I was watching that live. I think I might have exclaimed a few things in the forums. Yeah. No.
Yeah, and then on the pitcher side, not as many elected free agents here. And honestly, most of these are ones we know a little bit more about. Bryce Wilson was DFA'd and then elected minor league free agency. Mitch White, who we saw throughout the season and ended up having a fantastic finish to his AAA season. I'll let Joseph talk about him a little bit more in a second. Taylor Clark was acquired last offseason from the Royals. He got hurt in spring. He really struggled to get going at any point during the season. Kind of a similar story for Harold Chirino, who got off to a great start in 2023 and then got hurt and just wasn't quite the same. Kind of seemed like maybe he was he was stuck at the AA level with his talent level, but he had good stuff. He was an interesting pitcher to watch. And then another minor league free agent from last year, Sam Carlson, a former second round pick, I want to say, by the Seattle Mariners, out of high school. At one time, a pretty big prospect for them, but had kind of fallen off. The Brewers took a chance on him, and he did some good things for Biloxi this year. But Joseph, anything you want to touch on with any of these guys?
Yes. Well, I think as a card-carrying member in the Mitch White Truth movement, I think I owe it to the individuals who may perhaps be. Yeah, he was a second-round pick in 2017, by the way, Carlson. I think we all saw how much Mitch White was struggling as a Brewer out of the bullpen. It's nothing new to anybody who watched the Brewers or the Sounds, and it was painful at times, frankly. And I think people are wondering, why are we hanging on to Mitch White? He's just giving up 5-run blowouts in the meat of games. But kind of like Aaron Ashby, out of the blue, when they moved him to a starter, I don't think you can find a pitcher in the Brewer system from August through September and make a solid argument, maybe beyond Chad Patrick, who was lights out. Mitch White was given meaningful 5 to 7 innings, and he was looking good doing it. And so kudos to him for knowing he doesn't have the ability to take options. So it's going to be very hard to get into a situation that would be workable for him at the money he wanted. And kudos to him. He got $1 million contract and he went to the KBO. And I think it could be a story like Josh Lindblom, maybe, or it could be like a Colin Rea. You never know.
Yeah.
So that was frankly one of the most entertaining parts of the year. It's winding down, the ACL's closed, we're gonna playoff push, and then here's the Sounds and Mitch White. It was fantastic. I loved it. I watched several of his outings. Taylor Clark, Devaney. We had a whole community on Brewer Fanatic who were huge Cam Devaney fans. I was one of the early ones. And I think he's actually now he has a legitimate shot to be a utility player with the Royals, end of the bench guy, kind of like Monasterio is for the Brewers. So kudos to him. And also Mike Brasso went with him in that deal, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Ryan Brady. Ryan Brady
was the Ryan Brady. One. Yes, that's right. Brasso's son is a free agent. Correct. Ryan Brady, right, the BYU pitcher who looked pretty good in Biloxi last year. Yep. Taylor Clark, it's interesting watching the majority of his outings. You can see that the scouting report is spot on. His off-beat stuff is really good, but his heater, for whatever reason, tends to get smacked. And he had his moments at the end of the season where he kind of found a groove, but he's a guy where I question, he was getting starter innings, and I'm wondering if he might try to get back into a bullpen role somewhere. I don't know. They were asking him to start there just due to the shuffle with the reductions in the stateside roster limits. Sam Carlson gave pretty good setup innings. I don't think that he wowed per se, but he had a size and a presence on the mound. He definitely competed. He was relying heavy on his heater. It wasn't going to blow you away either, but he gave good innings. We all know Bryce Wilson. I don't need to talk there, but Harold Torino, like you said, that is a guy who has a lot in his bag. He just does. And he kind of reminds me of not the same pitcher by any stretch, but how I really liked Luis Contreras before he headed to the Astros. I thought he had a ton of life and a lot of arm side run on his heater. I think Harold's bread and butter is his off speed. He's got some really filthy action on a slider. Like, it is tight and it is hard thrown. I think for him, it was really a matter of control where he struggled to find the zone. And I don't know what would happen there from outing to outing, but he's got a ton of talent. And I have a feeling that it's just going to, some of these guys, they just need a different opportunity, different voice in the head or from the coaching staff, and just kind of work on a couple different things and it might click. I would have no surprise whatsoever if it happened.
No, I thought he was a guy. There was a chance coming into the season. I think I tweeted about it at one point that I thought he was a guy we might see in the majors this year. He's got the type of breaking stuff. He's got enough velo to be like that 1-inning reliever that can really be trouble for righties, especially. Like I thought there was a chance, but just didn't turn out that way this season. He didn't have quite the year he would have hoped for, but I definitely agree. I think moving forward, It would not surprise me at all for him to catch on with somebody and potentially end up seeing him in the majors at some point.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll touch on it a little more, obviously, when we talk about the Sounds, but I think the two guys that have similar profiles there, that I was left wondering, boy, something just didn't fully click this season. One of them is Harold Torino, and the other is Ryan Middendorf. Even though he
Yep.
was doing closer innings, and I love Ryan Middendorf. I have since he moved up 3 levels in his first year out of indie ball. But I think both players had very similar paths in 2024, and I'm sure they'll be working on their stuff in the offseason. So,
yeah. Moving on to some of the players who were released by the Brewers, just to clarify, the last group we went through are people who had the option to elect minor league free agency and chose to do so. These are players that the Brewers released on their own. We'll start with the position players again. A lot of DSL players here, so we won't have much to talk about on those guys, but we'll start off and we'll name them all. So center fielder Ramon Moreno, catcher Estefano Lozano, outfielder Fabricio Valera, catcher / first baseman Ludwin Tejada, infielder Ben Metzinger, outfielder first base utility guy Noah Campbell, outfielder Jeremy George, and then there was actually a two-way player in here. I put him in the position players, but Edilberto Santiesteban, who was actually a relatively big signing. It wasn't during the normal signing period, but he got, I believe, close to $800,000 in a signing bonus. He was an outfielder when he signed, but he pitched. I would say he was more of a pitcher this year for the DSL in the DSL. He always was touted for having, at the time of signing, a really, really good arm. So I'm guessing there was some velo in the tank. He just never really got the bat going. So worth a shot. Put him on the mound, see if you can work it out. He's a lefty, so not many lefty arms in the DSL in general. So let's see what we got. But he even had some flashes, a couple pretty good outings down there as a pitcher. But in the end, obviously not enough for the Brewers to feel that it was worth continuing that type of experiment, I guess. But on those other position players, anything that stands out to you or anybody you want to hit on here, Joseph?
Yeah, I think, I mean, on several of the DSL players, I think it's it's one of those things where we don't get to see what's going on the day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
So it's hard to know. It could be a numbers game. It could be something going on in the family or in their life. So I don't really feel, honestly, informed enough to comment with any type of, frankly, integrity on it. So I don't want to go there. But I will speak to, when Ben Metzinger was drafted and he started out with Timber Rattlers, that was pre-Wilkin, obviously, and we didn't have many, if any, honestly, because it's pre-Luke Luke Adams, obviously, up yonder. We didn't really have any third basemen, and I could just remember early in his tenure, my main concern was his arm. I felt like, boy, I don't know if that's going to work. However, I certainly didn't see what ultimately happened within the system, where he essentially became a bullpen catcher this year and a random spot player. And so I would just, I wish him the best. I just wonder personally, from you to me, I wonder what's going on there. I have no idea. But it's kind of just an unfortunate route for a Brewers prospect, but wish him the best. And then of course Noah Campbell, still a very skilled player, asked to do a lot of things, fill a lot of roles, and more often than not, he did it professionally and well. Now, I wouldn't say he excelled. I would say he did in periods of time. I think last year he had better moments. I think this year he seemed to be potentially dealing with injury, and just wasn't getting as consistent of playing time. But that's a guy, again, all of these guys are so talented, and it can be one of those things where it's just the right situation or the right health in their body. And so we just don't know. But he'll latch on, absolutely. He'll stay in affiliated ball, I have no doubt.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, 2023 was a pretty fun year for Campbell.
Oh man,
he
remember that
oddly
6
did.
game?
Yeah, no, he was crushing the ball at almost out of nowhere. He started hitting for a little bit more power. You saw it all. He did it between AA and AAA. It was impressive. He played every position. Defensively, he played a lot of positions, but he wasn't really ever set at any of them because there were some struggles at all of them. But there's value in being able to
better than the proverbial body that people like to say, which is pretty insulting, honestly. But not really like, oh, Gold Glove caliber. Not happening there. But again, not again. But this is the point. Like we talk about, baseball is really hard. It's really hard, and these are the best baseball players arguably in the world, and they're trying to get to the hardest level.
Hmm.
And you see it like a guy like Noah Campbell, you see how hard it is to maintain that type of output, and like players like Jackson Churio are such unicorns. It's
Yeah,
incredible stuff. So
it is. Moving to the pitching side, we had a good chunk of releases so far in the offseason as well on that side. Starting with a couple DSL pitchers, Francisco Guevara and Esmir Suarez. Then we had James Meeker, who we saw in make one appearance at the major league level. Cool moment for him as a former indie ball guy who had really just performed at every level of the minor leagues. Left-handed pitcher Adam Seminaris, who was acquired as part of the Hunter Renfroe trade. Right-handed pitcher Morris Austin, I want to say the 10th round pick in 2023, or maybe the 9th. Either way, one of the later day 2 picks in 2023. Yason Pena, who we saw actually perform pretty well a couple of years ago before things just started to kind of fall apart a little bit for him, and I think he dealt with some injuries at some points during that too. Harrison Duro, who was an undrafted free agent after last year's draft. Braylon Rodriguez, who was somebody who was pushed really quickly by the Brewers a few years ago and then got injured and just seemingly never really got back to where they were hoping he would be. Tyler Worley, and then also one more DSL pitcher, Ranwell Smith. So, Joseph, of those names, a couple that kind of stand out to you, or anybody that you want to talk about?
yeah, I mean, I think right off the bat, James Meeker, what a story. And
Yeah.
we'll get into this a little bit later in this podcast, but I mean, what he did in Australia was, I mean, it wasn't Sam Gardner dominant, but it was dominant. And
Yeah.
granted, the level of competition there, I mean, it's getting better if you look at what's going on there this year. However, yeah, you could kind of tell when he got to Nashville, he might have some issues. And as you say, he excelled at every level. And despite, he was one of those guys where I don't think he would be a darling in terms of shape and or what the finer tune of those types of things are looking at. However, he was one of those guys that also just got results by and large. However,
Hmm.
when he got to AAA, he did start facing that battle of tougher competition and seeing how his stuff
Yeah.
fared. And although he got the ground out, I believe his third of an inning of work up with the Brewers, I believe maybe was more than a third, but it was a ground out to short. It was a hard hit grounder.
Yeah.
So you could just see, and it felt like when they executed that move and then DFA'd him, I was like, well, that's interesting. It kind of has a Caleb Bosley feel to it. But he, being the soldier he is, he finished out the season, and kudos to him for taking his opportunity, and he'll get one. He's a good pitcher. He'll be an interesting guy to watch. He's approaching age 30. Does he have more left in the tank in terms of development? I don't know. But fantastic story. Another successful indie ball story for the Brewers. And, it got his foot in affiliated ball, and we'll see where it goes next. Adam Seminaris, it's hard to wax poetic on Adam Seminaris other than he found his niche in the bullpen with
Hmm.
the Shutters. And unfortunately for him, he doesn't really have starters stuff. I think that's fair to say. And I think that his best mode of attack as a pitcher is going to be out of the pen as a change of pace, because he sits low 90s, if not upper 80s. And he's going to rely on a very slow hook. It's not going to be a hard death ball. That is going to be a swooping slow curve that he's trying to, and a
Oh, yeah.
changeup that moves a little bit, but not a ton. And so he had some stretches, but I could just remember in the second half when they needed more starter arms and they asked him to fit that bill, he kind of got pegged. He really fell into a rut. So I didn't find that surprising. I hope he finds success elsewhere. And then obviously Morris Austin, as you said, he was the 10th round pick. I think out of the two, honestly, I think Austin, if I'm recalling out of my seasonal memory bank here, Austin may have thrown harder, but I remember Harrison Duro getting closer role moments with
Yep.
the Mudcats, and I think off the top of my head, he had 6 saves. However, that jump to high A, Morris Austin was really struggling with putting men on base, and
Hmm.
so again, when you're doing with the new stateside number crunch, you really it can be an unforgiving process. So I hope those guys find success and they can latch on an affiliated ball. If not that, indie ball, but I think they'll probably stay in affiliated ball. And then Braylon Rodriguez, I found that at the time I was mildly surprised because of how they fast tracked him through Carolina to high A. But it could have been a scenario where they just wanted to get him to high A to see what was happening, and
Yeah.
he really did not excel, whereas Dikembe Sanchez did. So we'll see what happens with all of these guys. And then, of course, Tyler Worley just had a really rough year at large.
Yeah.
I think he'll just need a reset in the offseason, and we'll see if he latches on. So,
Yeah. Agreed. So now we have gone through some of the people who left the organization. I guess we can do a little bit of a recap on some of the players who maybe weren't thought about or talked about a lot, especially at the end of the year because they were dealing with injuries. We had a group of players kind of rejoin the active rosters of all of these teams going into the offseason. So, right-handed pitcher Coleman Crow. We will talk about him when we get to the Arizona Fall League section in a little bit here, but he participated in that his first time pitching coming off of Tommy John. Right-handed pitcher Hayden Robinson, who also had an elbow injury and surgery. We'll talk about him when we get to the ACL tiers. Left-handed pitcher Brandon, I can't remember if it's Kanar or just Nar, but a left-handed pitcher who had shown some good flashes in the past, but he spent, I believe, all season, if not almost the entire season, on the IL this year. An infielder, Demetrio Nadal, who we'll talk a little bit about when we get to those tiers at the bottom again, because he was showing some good things before his injury, but he ended up missing all of this season. Outfielder Kalen Nicasia, who I know both Joseph and I both have a little bit of a soft spot for. I think we both are probably a little higher on him than some others might be. And we'll get back to that in a second. But then we had our lone two-way player left in the organization currently, Quentin Lowe, who missed the season with, again, Tommy John surgery. We have another Tommy John here with right-handed pitcher Tanner Shears. Edwin Jimenez returned off the IL, and same with Cameron Wagoner, who also is coming off of Tommy John surgery. So a lot of long-term full season injuries, guys who are technically off the IL. Some of them will likely start next season back on the IL, but a good chunk of these guys we'll probably see in 2025. So starting with Nicasia, Joseph, what do you like about him and any of these other guys you want to touch on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's known, at least in the forums. I make jokes. Shout out to Frank Madden on the truth. I'm definitely a Kalen Nicasia truther. I think he's just a good player, and I think a lot of times what happens is we get lost in the numbers and this and that. But when I watch these games and I try to convey this as well, and as honestly, as humble and polite way as possible. I'm not trying for contentiousness in our forums, but when you watch the guys, you just see the athlete and you see the gamer, and so Nicasia is an incredible defender, and it literally never gets talked about ever in the greater Brewers community. And I watch this guy; he covers a ton of ground, and he has a cannon. Like he's one of those
Yep.
guys where you just don't think he does, and all of a sudden, oh, did I get third base from right field? Woo! And I love his stroke. He's got a really nice swing, and I think it's just seasoning. He's an inexperienced guy. He was a high school guy, if I'm not mistaken. And as he's gotten more experience, he's just gotten better. And so I've watched him from day one as a Brewer, and he's a guy that, in contrary to what people might think, in a system that does not have a lot of outfielders, they really do not. And you're gonna find out this season, or we're all going to, who are the cream that's gonna rise, But I just love his game, and I would say that his injury was actually it was a pretty significant blow to the rotation of the field playing unit for the Mudcats,
Mm-hmm.
and it left a hole in the lineup. It just did, and then they called up Reese Walling, and he had a hot end of the season, thankfully. Another truth movement there, Reese Walling, hello. So, yeah, but I think Nicasia is a guy that a lot of people don't know about and a lot of people might sleep on, but I just think he's a really nice player. Lefty stroke. Gotta love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think the concern is obviously he whiffed at a 36% rate, which is
Oh,
way
yeah.
too high. But
Yeah.
honestly, when you watch him, it feels like he makes really good swing decisions and that he has a
Yeah.
good approach at the plate. But at some point, obviously, you have to make consistent contact. So that'll be the thing coming off this injury. We'll see if he can start to do that more. But there's a lot to like in the profile outside of the swing and miss, where I do think there's a good offensive hitter or offensive profile here. And like you mentioned, he's a good base runner. He's a good outfielder. He's got a good arm. There's a lot to like here. And he's only 22. He'll be 23 pretty much all of next year. But he was a high school pick only a couple years back, 2021. He's a guy that people need to at least keep an eye on.
Yeah, and the difference I would go through here is like, this isn't a Terrence Doston, who I liked, who very limited, very diminutive, but always found a way to make an impact in the game, even when his playing opportunity was sparse. Always appreciated that. But Kalen Nakazi, on the other hand, he has a frame, he has size, he has athleticism and fluidity to his game. But as you say, the strikeouts, yeah, when you watch him, you're like, wow, that was a good swing choice, but he missed the ball entirely. So there's something going on there in the swing path, in the strike zone. I'm not a hitting coach, obviously, so I don't know what exactly that is. But if there was a thing, it would be that. Like, because as you know, it's only going to get harder. So he's going to have to figure something else there. So hopefully he does.
Agreed. We'll quickly go through some of the kind of in-season losses, is what we're calling them. Really guys that were either released or traded throughout the 2024 season. Again, a bunch of DSL and ACL guys. We'll have a little bit on some of these, but not a ton. We'll go through the ones that we do have some information on or thoughts on. But starting on a couple DSL players, Wilfredo Cordero was released. Christopher Vasquez, an outfielder, was released. Outfielder Justin Durden, he retired. He was technically released, but then he did proceed to retire. Left-handed pitcher Daryl Thompson, another indie ball guy who had looked like he was on a really good track for a little while and then started to struggle in AAA. Outfielder Terrence Doston, who Joseph just mentioned, super fast, super athletic guy who was also a high school pick not a few years back, probably a while ago now, but struggled to hit, like he said, and just didn't ever get too much consistent playing time. Infielder Yanni Hernandez, who had been a major leaguer for the Rangers at one point, was a minor league signing last year. Left-handed pitcher Osbriel Magallan, he showed some pretty good things at times, and we'll probably touch on him a little bit. Right-handed pitcher Felipe de los Santos, infielder Angel Pereira or Angel Pereira, right-handed pitcher Samuel Valerio, left-handed pitcher Justin King, who we'll definitely talk about a little bit, right-handed pitcher Rafael Garcia, outfielder Danny Puerta, and Eduardo Charles, and infielder. All three of those are out of the DSL. So, Joseph, out of the guys that we were able to watch and the people we know about, anything you want to talk about here?
Absolutely. I think right off the bat, we'll just start from the top there. Daryl Thompson. Another, just the Brewers' inability, or excuse me, the Brewers' ability, their keen ability to advantageously take advantage of market inefficiencies because of the organizational, some people might call it constraints. I don't see it that way. There's opportunities, right? A problem is a solution. The solution here is scour the areas that other teams may not be taking advantage of. And the Brewers find absolute diamonds left and right. And let's go lefty here, Daryl Thompson. When he came to Biloxi, he was on fuego. And this year, he actually showed measurable improvement from his time in AAA last season. I think what happened here, and I'm not going to speak for Daryl, obviously, but I think what happened here is he had a newborn child, and he knew that his path to the Brewers bullpen was potentially obstructed, or was going to take longer than he wanted. And so, at the time, if you recall, Jim Goulart, our esteemed colleague, he wrote in the forum that Daryl, it was a mutual agreement that he would be released to seek opportunities elsewhere. However, he didn't latch on with any major league club. He didn't latch on with any affiliate. However, he is now pitching for Team USA. And before he went to Tokyo, I believe he had 2 shutout innings, maybe threw a couple strikeouts in there. I didn't see the line. It's for some inexplicable reason, it's hard to find the box score on the Team USA website. But I was tracking, and kudos to him. I have no doubt if he performs like that and performs like he's capable of, he'll get a contract. He has the stuff. So hopefully that all works out for him. And then I'll just end with Justin King. I think several of us were surprised when he was released from Biloxi, and just from the fact that his raw stuff is good. It's really good. Can he put it together consistently? That has been his issue. And he ran into a rough patch with the Shuckers. However, it seemed like at the time he had gotten back on track and was kind of normalizing back to the impactful pitcher that he is. And I took the release kind of with shock in the season. And I know, from speaking with people that there were people around Justin that were surprised as well. Like it kind of came out of the blue. But kudos to him, you know, pulled up the bootstraps proverbially, and he was pitching really well for the Blue Wahoos, like really well. I think he got there in that kind of scenario. You never know what's going on with the mentals. And I want to say he went 11 straight scoreless outings and got an invite to the AFL. Unfortunately, didn't have the AFL season he probably wanted, but you never know what they're working on down there. So I'm not going to speak to that. But he was a guy that I miss still. And I think that, he's got a path there to eventually become a call up. I really do. And hope it works out for him.
Yeah. Agreed. We also have a couple players that we'll probably want to touch on from the traded section here. Really only 4 main trades that lost significant minor leaguers this year. One of them being right-handed pitcher TJ Shook, who went to the Mets in exchange for left-handed pitcher Tyler J.
Get out over here.
Joseph has thoughts on that one. We'll let him get those out in a second. Another one being the Nick Mears trade, where the Brewers moved Eugenio Herrera and Bradley Blaylock to the Colorado Rockies for Mears. There was also the Gregory Berrios trade to Tampa Bay, which the Brewers received Aaron Savali. And then kind of a prospect also on the 40-man, also major leaguer last year, but Joey Weimer was moved with Jacob Junis for Frankie Montas at the deadline. So, Joseph, give me all your TJ Shook thoughts.
The Shookster. I mean, I just love TJ Shook, the pitcher, and I'm sure he's a great guy. Like you can sense it. I have no qualms about saying, like, I dialogued back and forth with family members just in sharing what, just talking about his game and how much I enjoyed watching him. And my personal opinion, I feel like they sold low, and I feel like the trade, I don't know the thinking behind it. Obviously, you have a veteran lefty in the bullpen. Maybe it's pitching insurance, likely. But I don't see it as an even trade. I just see it as a guy that legitimately, in TJ Shook, if he can keep progressing, he has the frame, he has the size, he has the arsenal to legitimately become a starter in the major leagues. I see it. Now, I might be wrong, and that's fine. But when you have a changeup like he does, with the ability to pepper the zone in the upper part with his arm side run between 95 and 96 regularly, boy, that's a commodity. And so I just felt like maybe it was the needs of the season that pushed them. But I have no doubt David Stern saw Shook available and targeted him. Why would he not? So I feel like for a kind of a journeyman lefty in Tyler J, I hope it works out there. But I think ultimately we may end up looking back at this trade in, say, 5 years and wonder, like, how did they get TJ Shook? So I hope it works out for him. Now, his challenge is going to be, he was lights out at Binghamton. He even got a couple saves, if I recall, which was exciting to see. They had him back in his 2 to 3 inning bullpen role, I believe. But it's going to be interesting because when Jarvis was traded to the Mets, he really struggled at AAA, and now he's no longer with the Mets. So that's going to be the real test. As we all know, you don't know until you go up to the next level. Well, TJ was very good in AA, and that's often a really hard transition. So I just really wish him the best, frankly. And I just feel sad that he's no longer a Brewers, because I can't watch him on the regular because I silo into the Brewers. I'm not going to watch Binghamton games. Sorry, TJ. And then, moving on from TJ, I think, Eugenio Herrera, man, interesting pitcher. Like one of those guys where, like, I felt like this was one of those trades where I was like, yeah, I like that for both teams. I really do. I really like Nick Mears. I didn't really care about what was happening with his stuff. And when it push came to shove, he was pivotal in the postseason. That's what I want. Great. So I felt it was a very even value. I think Herrera is the lottery ticket here, and I said that when the trade happened. I personally felt, having watched the majority of Blaylock starts with the Shuckers, I saw limitations. Rockies don't care. They just put people up into the major leagues anyway, and that's what they
Yep.
did there. Maybe it works out. Maybe I was wrong. In Colorado, I find that hard to believe given the nature of
Yeah.
Blaylock stuff. But hey, it could be wrong. Herrera is the interesting. I went down actually to Spokane and watched him. So
Oh,
one game, I was like, oh, that's the same guy I watched with Timber Rattler. So that was pretty fun. And then, I think, in the near term, we certainly got the better of the deal at the time between Gregory Barrios and Aaron Savali. However, Barrios had a really good season. It could have just been an adjustment period. But as we talked about off screen, that's a matter of numbers. There are
yeah.
so many quality infielders coming up that we're going to get into. So that made sense. And then, of course, Joey Weimer, despite his tweet when he got traded, showing his time in Cincinnati, if you want to say he was nosediving in Nashville, he fell off the cliff
Yeah.
with Cincinnati. So, I loved Joey when he was coming up. He's still, I don't know if he'll ever get the swing back to a place that'll work out. I hope it does. But I think all those trades outside of the Shook trade, I felt made sense for both clubs, and they benefited the Brewers, frankly. So.
Yep. I'm with you on all of that. I think Herrera was one of those guys that I was kind of sensing a breakout a couple years ago. He struggled a little bit in 23, but he was really, really good to start this year. Stuff is
Really good.
legit. It's mid 90s. It's two
Yeah.
good breaking balls. There's a
Yeah.
changeup, solid
Yeah.
command. Like, he's a guy I can absolutely see being a major league pitcher in a few years without any doubt in
Yeah.
my mind. There's a very good chance of that. So, but on the same note, I really like Nick Mears. I think he's going to be a really big part of this year's bullpen. So
Yeah.
it made sense. And
We had
there's plenty
control
of
with
them.
Mears. It filled a
Yes.
need. And he's got electric stuff. It's just a matter of, I think it's a matter of fine tuning some things and then the mix. With Herrera, going back to that, I think where he may end up struggling, his body type is a
Yep.
little bit. He got injured in the first year in Carolina. If you remember, he had a really wild game, and then he came out with an injury, and then he was out for a while. His body type, it seemed to be a little slimmer this year.
Yep.
However, he is a bigger body type, and so that may prove problematic moving forward. That's literally the only concern I would have.
Yep. Yeah. Agreed. So that kind of wraps up all of the main transactions that happened prior to right now. We'll go through a little bit of the AFL and some Winter League updates, but what we won't be touching on is any Australian Winter League updates because the Brewers are not participating this year. Kind of a surprise. I think everyone just sort of assumed it was going to be happening again. There was no word from the Brewers that they would not be participating. They have been with Brisbane. They've been partnered with them for the last 3 years, I believe, prior to this year. Maybe not including COVID. Either way, it had been a few years. Dave Nielsen, who is from Australia and was a Brewer at one point, was kind of a big part of that. And I guess my question for you, Joseph, is do you think him having his role change with the Brisbane Bandits is really the main reason we're not seeing this happen again? And why do you think we didn't hear anything about this? Why did they just start the season and never tell us?
Yeah, that's a good one. I don't know. I mean, I went out and just, my thunder was rolling. I started the Aussie League thread. I copied and pasted part of Daniel's thing from last year. And, uh, you know, one of the things is that like the coverage that we do, it kind of never ends. Like, as you know, the baseball season's never over. And so when you're doing what we're doing, we're just watching different things. And so they have an Australian Baseball League signings page. I was reloading because it comes mid-October to the end of that month. The season's around the corner, and they're going to announce their first affiliate club and then their next. That's how they roll it out. Well, it was crickets. And I was updating the page. And I was like, wait, what? And then, yeah, they have some type of affiliation this year with the Taiwanese League, which is, probably fun for the community over in Brisbane. But as a Brewers fan, I was left wondering what happened because there was no announcement. So to answer your question directly, I don't have causal proof here, but it would appear that Dave Nilsson was the linchpin that tied the two organizations together. That would
Yeah.
be my assumption, but I certainly don't know. So
Yeah.
all we know is that there's no Brewers to watch, and what that really means is there's no indie ball flamethrower to set a new record for the Brisbane
Yep.
Bandits. So that's where we
We
all
will
miss him.
not have Sam Gardner 2.0 this winter,
Whew,
unfortunately.
what a season he had! My
Yeah.
goodness.
We won't have Sam Gardner, but we do have some other Winter League updates we can go through. Shout out to Daniel Miller. Mueller. Is it Mueller or Miller? Do you know how
I
you
think it's Mueller.
pronounce it? Okay. Daniel Mueller for keeping us up to date on this in the Fanatic forums on the minor league forum. From the Venezuelan League, we have Andrew Monasterio over there. He has an 884 OPS and 133 plate appearances. He's also stolen 7 bases. Edbert Perez, who I've talked about on here a few times, is somebody that I don't think we need to completely forget about. He has an 817 OPS in 64 plate appearances, 5 RBIs, 1 stolen base, few extra base hits mixed in. Eduardo Garcia, who we've talked about a little bit already, but somebody who doesn't take many walks. He's had a small sample here, but it's an 824 OPS and 14 plate appearances, 3 RBIs as well. And then we have a pitcher, right-handed pitcher, Dikembe Sanchez, who Joseph mentioned a little bit earlier. He only pitched 3 1/3 innings. He gave up 2 runs, 4 hits, 0 walks, 2 strikeouts. He's already done. It seemed like he was just trying to get a couple extra innings in there and then move on to his offseason. We have Daniel Galarte. He has a 642 OPS in 22 plate appearances. Yasuar Garcia. He has a 222 OPS in 9 plate appearances and 1 stolen base. That's a tiny sample. Again, a lot of these are really small samples. The numbers aren't a ton to glean from them, but we're just giving an update here. In the Dominican League, we have Oliver Dunn, who has a 366 OPS in 23 plate appearances. From what I've heard, he's basically not swinging the bat, so I don't know if maybe he just went down there to get looks at live pitching again, almost. Like he's swinging a
Wow.
little bit, but it's rare. On the Puerto Rico Winter League, we have Justin Yeager, who was acquired as part of the Contreras Piamps deal. He's thrown 4 innings scoreless, 2 hits, 2 walks, 5 strikeouts. We have Ramon Rodriguez, who we'll also talk about a little bit in the AFL update. He's had 3 plate appearances, but he has a 2,000 OPS and a stolen base, which not many of those on his record. And then in the Mexico League, we have Jesus Broca. He has 8 1/3 innings pitched, 4 earned runs, 8 hits, 6 walks, 6 strikeouts. So we're actually going to talk about him a little bit later as well. But moving on to the AFL, we have finished out that season now. Brock Wilken ended with 100 plate appearances. He had a 570 OPS. He hit 4 homers, but he did strike out at a 32% clip. He walked at a 12% rate, which is fine. And he also whiffed at about a 33% clip. So those are not great numbers. Again, I've talked about him a lot. I'll let Joseph if he wants to in a second, but there's a lot going on with Brock Wilken, and I think more than anything, we're hoping to see a nice reset this offseason and just get back to what we saw post-draft in 2025. So Juan Baez, he's probably the biggest success story of the AFL season here. He went down there. He had 92 plate appearances. He had an 877 OPS, 2 homers, a strikeout rate of 19.6%, and a walk rate of 14.1%, which was maybe the most notable part of that for me. He did not draw many walks his first couple of years in professional ball. So seeing him draw some, it's a hitter's environment, and pitchers are not usually great with their command down there, but still the ability to lay off of the pitches and take them is still good to see. It's good progress. Luis Lara had 100 plate appearances as well, 710 OPS. He hit a homer. He had a 17% strikeout rate and a 12% walk rate. I think the main thing I heard from people down there is that he actually hit into some pretty bad luck, and that 710 OPS isn't necessarily indicative of what he was doing down there. For the people who were able to watch him, it sounds like he actually raised kind of his prospect status a little bit, as much as you can at the AFL. The defense was phenomenal by all reports. He had 3 outfield assists in a 2-game span at one point. Like, he did a lot of good things down there. So that was good to see. Like I mentioned, Ramon Rodriguez was a late add to the team. I think they needed an extra catcher kind of at the end of the AFL season. He only got 16 plate appearances, 688 OPS. He walked at an 18.8% rate, and then he struck out at a 12.5% rate. But again, those are tiny, tiny samples, so not much to glean from that. Other than that, he went down there, and honestly, he was one of my kind of favorite. I don't want to say non-prospects, but in terms of like people that are way off the radar, he was one of my favorite players to watch this year in Appleton. And
Absolutely.
Joseph, I know you have similar thoughts on him, but he's just a really, really good kind of the Brian Navaretto of the lower levels, honestly, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Um, just a leader, really good catcher defensively, really good arm, and got hits when they needed him to get hits. Kind of just seemed like he could come up
Absolutely.
in those spots and get it done. So, along with him, anybody else you want to touch on from any of these guys I've talked about in the Winter League or the Fall League that I didn't really go into depth on?
Yeah, starting with Lara, I think what we have seen at an extremely consistent level since he's been assistant, his defense is really good, like
Yeah,
really good. Crashing into wall good, holding on to everything, has a way better arm than you would think. He's just an incredible defender, literally gold glove caliber. And I don't say that about a
yeah,
lot of guys. Um, and so when we were talking early before we had kind of schematically figured out this podcast series, we talked about that. And then you had mentioned that the contact was better than he was getting credit for with the final results. And that was really encouraging. And then just after we had that conversation, he went on a little mini run to end the season and he saw his OPS
hmm
jump up. So that felt really validating there. And so I think that that was a key for him for going into next season, because I know that a lot of fans who follow the minor leagues were a little bit concerned there. They got to high A and he kind of just fell off the face of it, a little bit fell off the face there. But even and there's the guy, like Yoferi Rodriguez, who we'll talk when we get to low A and a little bit at high A. He had his up and down spurts as well this year, more productivity there. However, he's a guy like Lara, where undeniably you are always going to get an incredible defensive performance. There
yeah,
literally was not a game that went by when either of them weren't giving it their all, making an incredible plays. So that's always a huge plus. Um, Ramon Rodriguez, yeah, I'll just echo that. He's a really good player. And in Wisconsin, there were periods of time there in their season as they were clearly the class of their league or their division as well. He was being put into the DH role because he was going on power streaks. So I
hmm
would say that from the vantage point of like a Navarreto clone defensively, yeah, I think that's there, but also I think he has the capacity for a better bat, which is really exciting.
yeah,
Um, so I was really encouraged when I saw that he got sent down. It was late October. I was like, yes. I felt like one of those moments where I was like, okay, good. They see what I see. Yeah, okay. And then I think, I'm not going to belabor anything about Brock Wilken. I've said it on numerous occasions. I personally felt like he just needed to reset and didn't need to go down to the AFL, but I also understand it from an
yeah,
organizational perspective. They want to get some more at bats. He had the facial injury earlier in the year. However, the 2 month slump that extended into the significant portion of the AFL was months after that injury. So I don't know what has to happen there. And so I just hope that he gets time with his family. More importantly, he had his first kid, like spend time with your wife and your kiddo, and then, reset, come back fresh. There's no doubt all the talent's there. That's why he gets the notoriety he does. And he has the power stroke. It's going to come down to decisions and meaningful contact outside of the two outcomes. It cannot just be home run or strikeout. So that's going to be his
yeah,
work moving forward. Hopefully it happens. And then Baez, I'd say I was surprised, and I am, because the walks, as you spoke to, that was, for a guy who's very free swinging with incredible contact rates, the walks have not been there. I watched several of the AFL games. I didn't watch all of them. It's my fault and my farm here. However, I watched enough. He looked smooth. He looked comfortable in the field, which is what I'm always looking for with him, which he's done since Carolina. His defense performance there has been better than his original ACL numbers would indicate. Like I've argued for that in the forums, kind of ad nauseum. Like I say, he's a better third baseman than people really give him credit for. Good arm, covers enough ground for him. In my opinion, it's the mental mistakes. So the over aggression, can he harness the outs on the base paths? the needless outs, honestly, the over aggression for really no reason. When you're watching the game, you're like, why do we give it out there? But to see him healthy and close out the year and then go down there and have that performance, the most important thing there is he really put his name in the prospect discussion, which is great because I've been saying he's a little bit like Arenamo for folks. There's always a problem they're finding there, whereas I'm always like, well, there's actually a really good player here. So I wasn't really just enthusiastic about his season at large. He tailed off, from that extremely hot start, which I think anybody who followed knew that wasn't going to be sustained. But great season. Have to be happy with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving to the pitcher side of things, we had 5 pitchers down there for the Brewers. Some definite mixed results here. So Will Childers was 10 innings. He had a 4.5 ERA. He struck out hitters at a 37.8% clip, which is fantastic. And then a crazy 48.8% whiff rate, which was one of the best in the entire AFL. He walked hitters at a 13.3% clip. Too high, not insane, but still too high. You want to see that a little bit lower. I will say, on the note of everything related to kind of the walks in the AFL this year, whenever StatCast was on, the umpires had some pretty tight zones. They were showing there were some pitches well within the zone that were being called balls. So that was not helping things for an already a group of pitchers that were already somewhat lacking in command, just to have tight zones across the league. But Childers showed some really, really good things. He showed a legitimate 3 to 4 pitch mix. Kind of depends. They're labeling his cutter and a slider as 2 different pitches, but they're very similar pitches. So I think he's really just throwing 3 pitches. It's a 4-seamer that had a 60% whiff rate against it when it was on StatCast, which is ridiculously good.
Was
a 40%. Oh yeah. And he commands the fastball at the top of the zone really well. That was noticeable all season long. He's very good at getting it where it needs to be. And then the cutter / slider did really well. Both, I mean, they grade out well as pitches just in general. And the curveball also grades out as an above average pitch. And I think you're looking at a guy who's got a legitimate relief profile that he's kind of
I
like.
think we got a guy, folks. I think we got a guy.
I think we got one here with Childers. And then moving to Coleman Crow.
The family connection. It's all there. There's historicity. It's exciting.
It is. It is. Yeah, and then Coleman Crow, I talked about earlier, coming off Tommy John. He threw 9 innings, 8 ERA, only a 14% strikeout rate, only a 16.7% whiff rate. He only walked hitters at a 4.7% clip. He threw a lot of strikes, and you saw some of the glimpses of the stuff that the Brewers were looking for. The curveball kind of returned to what it was looking like pre-injury. It took a little bit of time for some of the other pitches to start looking kind of as solid as they did pre-injury, but I thought by the end of it, he looked pretty good. He didn't get the results. He got hit around a little bit. I think the in-zone command was lacking, whereas he was throwing strikes, but they weren't necessarily where you want it to be. And in the past, he's been able to do that. So I don't worry too much about that. I do think it made it an easier decision for the Brewers to not protect him in the Rule 5 draft. And we'll talk about who they did protect in a couple minutes here. But yeah, Crow showed some things, but definitely still some room to grow coming off this injury. Nick Merkel, who I liked a lot watching him this year. I write up these starting pitcher and relief pitcher of the month awards for the minor leagues every month throughout the season. And Merkel was a pretty consistent. He showed up on those lists a decent amount, and I believe he even won one of the months. But he went down there. He had 13 innings pitched, a 6.92 ERA, which not great. I should note league average ERA in the AFL was 5.93. So just to kind of give the environment we're talking about here, he struck hitters out at a 26.9% clip, really, really solid 33.6% whiff rate. The 17.9% walk rate is kind of where you see the bad part of what he was doing down there. He gave up a couple of homers, which really killed his ERA, but he also was walking too many guys. And that was a common theme, again, really honestly, amongst all pitchers down there, but also especially in the Brewer system. But what I think we saw more than anything out of Merkel is the fact that he throws 5 to 6 legitimate pitches and he does it
Yes,
out of
sir.
the pen, and that's not common. There's kind of like it gives me a little bit of like a Joaquim Soria type of vibe, a guy who didn't have crazy velocity, but he threw every fastball, he threw multiple breaking balls, and he threw a changeup out of the pen, and that's not common. Like, you don't see that much. And not only does Merkel do that, but he does it with 7 feet of extension. He's a huge, huge dude. His nickname is Large Mammal. So there's
Love it.
there's a lot there's a lot to like from Merkel. I know he didn't have the results he probably wanted, but I actually came away from the AFL stint a little bit more encouraged by him than what I was
Yes.
even before going in. So it's not all about stats. I love stats, but eye test and everything else matters too. And obviously, there's plenty of actual data that we were able to get because of these StatCast games. And he pitched a lot of games on the StatCast fields, which was helpful for me. Moving to another guy who showed really, really good stuff in the fall, Ryan Burchard, 15 innings, 4.2 ERA, 27.5% strikeout rate, solid. 27.5% walk rate, not good. Don't want that. But then on the same note, 38.9% whiff rate. So he showed the stuff is there. There's a little bit more. He got hurt very early this last season after a really, really good debut for the Mudcats. He basically missed the next like 3 to 4 months. And
Yep.
when he came back, the stuff just did not look as sharp as what it had looked pre-injury and really in that first start. It looked a lot more in line with what we were expecting to see in the AFL, but that command is going to be the big thing for him. You can't walk 27.5% of hitters that you face. Again, he was one of the guys that I specifically saw get squeezed pretty bad in a couple of his starts. But even on that note, like, part of the reason you get squeezed is because you're all over the place. So that can tend to lead to some of those things. And I'm a big fan of Burchard. I really like the stuff. I think there's legitimate like swing and miss stuff. I'm highly doubting that he's going to be able to stick as a starter now, whereas I did think he might be able to originally. But I do think there's a legit bullpen piece in there. It's just a matter of reining in the command enough to be a reliever. And then another name that I enjoyed watching at Appleton this year, but really, really struggled at the AFL. Mark Manfredi threw 5 1/3 innings with a 13.5 ERA, 16.2% strikeout rate. That's not very good on its own. He has decent stuff. And then a 35.1% walk rate. So he was walking hitters at over double the amount of times he was striking them out. And he did that with a 30% whiff rate, which is average or better. So he just really was all over the place. It was hard to watch. It was 5 1/3 innings, but it was spread out over quite a few outings because he just could not get through his inning. But he's a lefty with like a little bit of like a Brent Suter, Josh Hader hybrid delivery. Like, he gets the Suter type of quickness, a little bit of the leg lift, and then the leg lift turn goes into like Hader mode. And he pitched pretty well at times in Appleton. So it was a little surprising to see him struggle. I'm not going to take too much away from it. I think he just really struggled with command where he wasn't great with command at high A, but it was not like this. I think it's more a matter of potential. He might have been tired out a little bit, first professional season, a lot of things going on. But it was a struggle for him. So I went more in depth on those guys, but Joseph, anything you want to add on any of them?
Well, I would love to know what happened with Mr. Manfredi, because he was getting the move to the late innings for Wisconsin because of manager Victor Estevez. Victor Estevez was talking about how they loved his heater. And if we're going to talk about the Raptor there, I would argue at this stage of his career, his heater has a better profile than Suter's ever
Oh, yeah.
did. So I don't know what happened, or if they were intentionally working on something and it just didn't work out.
Right.
So I'm going to go that direction because I really like Manfredi, the pitcher, and I think he has really good stuff. However, we did see hints of this late
Yeah.
season in Wisconsin, where
Yeah.
Kate Keener really took off. We saw Manfredi start to kind of go the other direction. So
Yeah.
I guess in that regard, it's not all that surprising. It's just more disappointing. I don't need to get into Burchard. You love him. I know you have. Those walks are not sustainable at any level. You know that, but he has stuff. Nick Merkel, I love Nick Merkel. I've been talking about Nick Merkel since he was in the Brewers system. I think he's just so underrated, and he constantly gives you meaningful 2-inning stints in crucial parts of the game. and he can do it consistently because he has that mix. And his off-speed stuff is filthy from his extension. Like his hook is like, woo! It is a 12-6 bomb. Love him. Was really happy to see him. I watched the first 3 Coleman Crow outings. Totally agree with what you say. And the real and I think that's just an aspect of getting your arm back under you. His hook is really good.
Yeah.
You can see it. He has a little deception in that heater. Like he gets a little late movement in the zone that I really liked. So once I saw that, I said, "Oh, okay. He just needs more repetition." The real story is Will Childers. Like we have a pitcher here. Like we have a legitimate guy who fought adversity this year, got sent down to Wisconsin, if you remember, then didn't blink, did his stuff, got better, went back to Biloxi in a playoff push and performed, and now gave us his best innings as a Brewer. I'm stoked. So I'm really excited for him, and I couldn't be happier for his family because of their connection to the Brewers. So that to me, it was arguably my favorite storyline of the AFL. In a Brewers AFL, if we're being honest, on a Javelinas team that really was kind of not the cream of the crop down in the AFL.
Yeah.
It was nice to have a really fun storyline like him. So excited.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving forward, there's a few other kind of upcoming dates that we have to keep an eye on the minor league side specifically. Minor league free agency has already begun. There was a good article by Matt Trueblood on the Brewer Fanatic website. You do have to be a caretaker to be able to read that article, but it was 5 minor league pitchers that the Brewers may target, and it included our old friend Yoel Kuno. The Rule 5 we will talk about in a second here because the Brewers did protect Chad Patrick and Logan Henderson. And really, honestly, I was going to point to some possible inclusions, but we already are past that point, so there's no point in doing that. We'll talk a little bit about Patrick and Henderson. I don't want to talk too much. Jack and I are going to go in more depth on some of these major league specific moves on our podcast soon here, but any thoughts? I know you have thoughts on Patrick specifically and anything on Henderson as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that just I'm not going to get into my deeper thoughts on it, but I just think when you have a season like Chad Patrick had, a historical season, there's only 3 players in the entire International League that have ever won a Triple Crown in the history of the league. So if a guy does that and has the month he had to close his season, and I spoke to you about, I went back and watched the Norfolk outing. I went back and watched the Memphis outing when he struck out 12. He just touched another level. It was air apparent. With a guy that leans into his cutter was doing filthy stuff. So it just didn't surprise me at all. I know that, so according to Matt, that there may have been members of the organization who didn't know what was going to happen. I don't think that's surprising in any transaction. So I just didn't see it as surprising. And so I was really happy for Chad Patrick. I thought he was a guy who was consistently overlooked by the greater community for one reason or another. And I just saw a guy who gave a great season, had some rough patches, but got better at the time that he needed to get better. So kudos to him. Logan Henderson, not surprising. I would just say, if it came down to like I needed a pitcher today to start a game for me, I'm picking Chad Patrick over Logan Henderson just because of the age gap and experience. Logan has more work to do. Raw tools are there. That's why he's the prospect he is. But he's currently and was in Nashville kind of a 2-pitch guy. And so hopefully that can develop. But totally understandable why he was protected given his success at each level. I would say that the real thing I want to say to it, and you guys will go more in depth on both of those guys. The real thing that was surprising to me was what this might say about Shane Smith. And so I thought, given the season that Shane Smith had, given his track record as a Brewer, I thought he was a legitimate candidate. They had the roster spots. And so I don't know what this really says. Does it mean that they're going to be trying to shift him back to a bullpen role? Does it mean that they feel he's too inexperienced, which he is, in his shift back to starting? Not that he hasn't started before, but I just thought I was mildly surprised that we didn't protect him, because to me, if I'm a team like the Oakland Athletics or even the Rockies, I see a guy like Shane Smith available, knowing he can kind of fill a couple roles, and knowing that, like, especially with the Rockies, I don't really develop in my system. I just bring him to the major league. I think he's a guy who could get plucked. But I would also say to that, I'm most often wrong with the Rule 5 decisions and who actually gets taken. in terms of who other teams are targeting. So,
Yeah.
and the other thing I want
Yeah.
to add is that the Ernesto Martinez thing, once that young man Ian commented so adeptly to Jim's Twitter post, that once Ernesto signed with the Brewers, it indicated that no other major league team had offered him that. It just,
Yep.
right. Why would you not
Yep.
have the ability to option a player, a field player? So that made a
Right.
ton of sense, even though I love the
Yep.
player.
Yeah. 100%. And I think just as a general note, it's we all who follow this this system super closely, like we all see everything that you can possibly see in these guys, but there's also 29 other teams that are probably
Yeah.
leaving a Shane Smith unprotected here. And it's just a matter of, we know the system so well, but there's so many players out there, and the Brewers tend to be right when they leave these guys
Yep.
unprotected. But Smith is the one guy that I also was a little surprised by. He's got the stuff to he kind of has the stuff to potentially stick as a reliever for a year and then potentially start in the future, which is always the interesting type of arm for me. Like if you could put him in your pen for a year and then try and make him a starter later on, those are the Rule 5 guys that I always find interesting. But yeah, we'll see. I know he was listed on the Baseball America list of players that are to watch in the Rule 5 today. So he's going to get some attention for sure. Moving forward here, I talked about how minor league free agency has started, and they've already made a few signings, and Jack and I are probably going to talk about those again too. So we won't even touch on those here. We're already going real long on this one. This is going to be a long episode.
I hate it.
But I mean, I think the question some fans always ask, and there's always sarcastic comments under minor league free agent signings, and there's always somebody's being funny under there, but like, why should we care about a minor league free agent signing is kind of the question I'm sure some people are wondering. And you compiled a pretty good list here, and I'm gonna let you go through it. But there have been a lot of players the Brewers have signed. Specifically, I think the Brewers are better at this than a lot of teams. I don't think this is necessarily the case for everyone. There probably are teams where it's like, who cares? It's a minor league signing. But the Brewers are good at this. And you listed a bunch of players. Some of them are major leaguers. Some of them were just really important depth pieces in the minor leagues over the last couple of years. But you want to go through some of them and then kind of talk about why this is important for
Yes.
you too?
Yes, I do. Thank you for passing the baton. Yeah, let's just start right off the bat. Tobias Myers. Hello? Does anyone remember him?
Yeah.
That was a free agent signing, straight up the scrap heap. As don't mean to say that in any way insulting, but seriously,
Yeah.
the Brewers are incredible at finding really good players. Now, it wasn't a free agent signing as we talked about, but for all intents and purposes, Isaac Collins was left available in the minor league Rule 5. So we can, it's neither here nor there, but we're finding really good players. Inoue Paredes, free agent. Brewer Hicklin, free agent.
Yeah.
I mean, say what you want about in terms of performance at the major league level. As I've said before, baseball is really hard. I don't know if we're aware of that. But these guys come in, they give good innings, and they become consequential players. Kevin Herget, he came up for the Brewers and was really good.
Yeah.
Despite him being CFA, he still latched on with a major league club. I mean, but Monasterio, say what you want about him being the type of player, utility player he is. He's a clubhouse guy. The manager loves him. The team loves him. And more often than not, he still gives you quality play, if not the play you're really looking for. And as you know, I was calling Monasterio the year before he was even added. I saw the same things when he got sent down to Biloxi and then called back up to Nashville. And lo and behold, he became the better player than he ever has been. And now he's playing a key role there. There's just, Rob Zastryzny, Jared Koenig. Jared Koenig ring a bell? I mean, lights out. So the Brewers, again, with market inefficiencies, when you have a lower budget, bottom third, they're still spending more money than they ever have been. Contrary to what fans want to say about the Attanasio family, they spend money and they have a very well-run organization. To me, that's more valuable, frankly. But they find these market inefficiencies and they find these guys and they give great innings. Jared Koenig was really good.
Yeah.
What more do we need to say? It doesn't matter how you got them. They're good players. So I love that they do it. And if we look at the AAA roster today, and arguably the AA, you can see how they operate. right? There's a high turnover rate with these minor league free agents, but it's also
Yep.
because minor league free agents know they'll get an opportunity. I'll even do a shout out to a guy who I don't even know who's going to play anymore, but Tyler Herb. He was an incredible starter down in Biloxi originally as a minor league free agent, went to Nashville. I thought he was knocking on the door, frankly, of becoming some type of five-tool guy for the bullpen or fill-in staff call-up guy, and then he got a major injury. He didn't play all of last year. He's still a free agent, so I don't know. But they just find these players, and
Yeah.
it's a skill. It is a skill, and it is a development in your personnel department, and the Brewers are incredible at it. So there's
Yeah.
my piece. I hand back the
Agreed.
floor.
Agreed on all of that. So moving forward, we're going to take a quick look at kind of a, t- a regular season wrap up, and then also talk a little bit about the playoff teams from the season. And we're not going to go into depth on players or anything here. We're just going to talk about the season as a whole for each team. But yeah, we'll kick that one off here, and we'll just start at the top, or I guess the bottom, really, with the two DSL teams. DSL Brewers won, ended up going 32-23. They did not make the postseason. Same with DSL Brewers 2, who went 30-23, which, just on a quick note there, when you split your talent up and both teams are 7 and 9 games over 500, that's a pretty good sign of how much talent is down there in the DSL. And we'll get into that when we go through our tiers here. But there's quite a few players who are noteworthy from the DSL just this season. The ACL Brewers ended up going 28-32. They did not make the playoffs either. The Carolina Mudcats went 78-51. They were swept by Fredericksburg 2-0 in the semifinal, but a fantastic season. A lot of people coming in and going out of Carolina all season, which I think is noteworthy too. The fact that they were always dealing with a different roster. Not many players spent their entire season there. The team they ended with was far different than the one they started with, and that's impressive. Good work from the entire coaching staff and obviously all the players who came through. The Timber Rattlers went 77-54 in a somewhat similar vein. They had more players who kind of spent the majority of their season there, but it's the same thing. When you're at those lower levels, there's always guys kind of rotating through the roster. And Wisconsin ended up sweeping Quad Cities in the semifinal 2-0. They had a walk-off hit. Luke Adams, who we'll talk about at length in the next episode, but very, very exciting moment for him. He, of course, showed as much emotion as any baseball player ever has because he's Luke Adams, and he does that all the time. They ended up losing 2-1 to Lake County in the championship series, but a very, very impressive season from both of the A-ball teams for the Brewers. The Biloxi Shuckers ended up going 66-69, but they did end up making the playoffs due to a stronger second half. They lost 2-1 to Montgomery in their semifinal series, and frankly, winning one game in that series was a bit of a success for me. They were outmatched in that series.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then on the AAA side, the Sounds, ironically, have a much better record than the Shuckers, but they go 78-68 and did not make the playoffs. Again, I think Rick Sweet is actually probably more well known than most AAA managers from just like a casual fan because of how long he's been doing it and everything. But he and the Brewers seem to work so well together in terms of, guys
Yep.
going up and down. The Brewers ride the shuttle between their AAA affiliate and Milwaukee more than most major league teams. So he's in a similar vein to the Carolina team. He's dealing with new players all the time. He's got a bunch of pen guys that he can't really use because they might be going to Milwaukee. They might be, there's just always things he has to deal with. And he does a fantastic job. It's clear that him and the organization are just kind of lockstep and everybody's in agreement on what his job is. And winning is secondary, but it's also important at the same time. And he does a really, really good job of finding that balance. So that's really the main wrap up here. But Joseph, on any of these teams, any like broad thoughts you have on the teams specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I just think the macro, like what an incredible year, frankly.
Yeah.
And honestly, seeing the ACL Brewers record, knowing their pitching struggles, it's kind of amazing that they almost finished 500.
Yeah.
I mean, they were last in the league, and we'll get to that in a lot of categories. And yeah, love Rick Sweet, top 5 overall manager and wins as a manager in minor league baseball. He's just an incredible guy. Jeff Hem, shout out to the announcer. He gives great interviews with Rick throughout the season. And now I would just say he has a spy in the Brewers clubhouse in Al LaBeouf. It's incredible. He got his guy up to the major league club, who will be the new hitting coach, which is awesome. Really excited about that. So yeah, what a season. Just frankly, like, look at those records. Incredible stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, really good season for the system. And on a broader note, I think winning can sometimes get overlooked in the grand scheme of things with all the prospects and everything else. But I think the Brewers do and should value players learning how to win throughout the system. It's important. It's a skill.
Yes.
It's something that can be taught. It's not something that's necessarily innate for players. There's guys who it is. It's a natural ability that they have in an internal thing that they've just always had in them. But you can teach players how to do this, and going through playoff races and going through these types of things where there's higher stakes do matter. And
Yeah.
that's why a lot of times you see the Rays also at the top of these organizational like win-loss leaderboards. It's important. It does matter. It doesn't necessarily get, and I would still say it's secondary. I think it's secondary to development and all the other stuff that comes with it. But I do think it should get a little bit more attention when teams consistently compete at every level, because it's teaching guys how to do it. And it's also a good sign that you have talent and guys who know how to win games. And it was a fun year. One of honestly a lot lately, but this was a really good year overall for the organization.
Yeah, and that Carolina sweep to Fredericksburg, I mean, running into the buzzsaw that is Sikora to Clemmy, I mean, to low A guys, that is essentially as good as it gets from a starting pitching perspective. And we'll get into it there, but the game 2 was definitely there for the taking. I thought they had it.
Oh yeah.
So it was a really competitive series.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, we will finally move into our DSL and ACL tiers here. We're going to start with the DSL. Before we get into that, though, I do want to point to a really good blog that was written by Cheesehead in QC, who we also have a question from later, I believe. But he wrote up a bunch of the DSL hitters who could be coming stateside, and there's a lot of them, as you're going to see in a few minutes here when we get into the list. But really well done over there. Go check it out. It'll be in the blog section. I'll do my best to remember to put a link in the description when I when I submit this. But if I don't, you'll be able to find it in the blog section from Cheesehead and QC. So just before we get into anything here, we're going to go through these tiers. We want to make it clear that obviously we don't know everything about these guys, and especially honestly at these lower levels, these are even more of a educational guess, I guess is the best way to put it. Like we're basing it off of our knowledge that we do have, but our knowledge is limited. We haven't had the chance to watch these guys play day to day. We're relying on other scouts. We're relying on the data that we have available to us, which isn't always a ton for these lower levels as well. So we'll do our best. We're gonna give some thoughts, but we want to make it clear that we're not telling everybody that this is it. These are the tiers. Like these could change drastically for all these players by this time next year when we have more information on them, when they've grown, when they've come stateside for DSL guys. Like there's a lot of time to go here, but this is kind of the snapshot of where we view the players going in. And so, Joseph, unless you have anything to add, we can get started on the
Well,
DSL.
yeah, real quickly, shout out to Gordon Ash, right? And the Academy. I mean, we're seeing the fruits of the labor right here. We're going to start off right off the bat. We have a legitimate prospect coming stateside who is being discussed throughout the entire baseball community as a future number 1 prospect in all of baseball before he's played an inning stateside. I mean, that's incredible in the first season of their complex. I just think it's an incredible. I mean, I'm not saying that, this is going to happen every year, but wow, what a time to be a Brewers fan. It's incredible.
Yeah. No, it is. It's great. And I threw the DSL tiers up on, if you're watching the video here, you can see it. But if you're not, we're going to go through them quickly here. So we kind of based it on, it's going to change for each level, but there's just different tiers based on what we saw from guys, what we're looking at, and kind of how we're viewing them right now. And at the DSL level, we had one tier at the top, and we put it as superstar potential. And we talked about, where Joseph kind of hinted at Jesus Mate here, but there's another name that's getting a lot of love, and even honestly more than guys like Yoferi Rodriguez and Jackson Churio and those guys got at the DSL level. So there's two names here that are getting a ton of attention coming out of their one DSL season, starting with Jesus Mate, who I think everyone who pays any attention to the minor leagues kind of already knows about Mate. But we're talking about a switch hitting shortstop, a guy who already has posted exit velocities of over 109 off the bat. He had a 90th percentile exit velocity of 103.9 as a 17-year-old. Ridiculous. Like that would be in the upper third of AAA this year. And he's a 17-year-old. So huge pop in the bat, but it's coming from an extremely athletic frame. This is a guy who's expected to have a pretty decent chance of either sticking at shortstop or potentially moving to second or third, but they think he can play the infield. There's just a ton to like here. He stole a bunch of bases this year. He ended up hitting 6 home runs in the DSL, which is up there for any Brewers hitters over the course of time. And again, this is a switch hitter who walked at an 18% clip and struck out at a 13% clip. So just everything you could look for in a prospect, you got it from Jesus Mate this year. And as much as you can possibly glean from a DSL player, Mate's got it because he's got scouts backing it. He's got every metric backing it. I think the only concern I've seen with him is that his swing can get a little inconsistent. He's 17. So like that's not 17-year-olds are inconsistent in general. And at the same time, he wasn't as a hitter this year. He did so many good things. He ended up with a whiff rate of only 11%. Just an insane season for Mate. And on the same note, Luis Pena he almost got overshadowed despite having technically a better season statistically, because Jesus Mate posted a 169 WRC plus. Luis Pena posted a 175 WRC plus. He hit 393. He led all of minor league baseball for any sort of qualified hitter in batting average. I'm not a big batting average guy, but if you lead all of minor league baseball in it, you're probably hitting pretty well. And at the same time, he had a 1039 OPS and he showed some pop. It wasn't necessarily in the form of homers. We did see in the DSL All-Star game, he actually hit a home run that left the bat at 104. This is a skinny. There's still room to grow with the body with Pena here, but he was 39 of 43 on stolen bases this year. Scouts expect the power to come around because they expect him to be able to add weight in a productive way, but we're talking elite speed, a guy who some think is going to be able to stick as a shortstop, and there's power potential, and he hit the ball extremely well. Now, the one main thing with him is that the difference really between him and Mate more than anything other than the power is that the swing decisions are said to be a little bit worse for Pena. It sounds like he's a little bit more chase happy, really good bat to ball skills. So he gets the bat on the ball when he chases, but that works at the DSL level. It might not work when you get to face better pitchers who are a little bit more prone to purposely getting you out of the zone with their pitches. But this is a really, really high ceiling here too. And two guys in the same class who weren't even the highest bonus. And we're going to get to him in a second too, but two guys that are legit. Both Mate was ranked the number 1 DSL player by pretty much everyone prospect wise. And Pena was top 4 by pretty much every single thing too. So basically 2 of the top 4 prospects in the DSL were Brewers from this class. Joseph, on these two, what do you got on Mate and Pena?
Yeah, I mean, incredibly concise and potent descriptions there. Like, agreed 100%. And also, the thing I loved about Mate from those clips that we're able to get from the Dominican is you can tell he knows it.
Oh yeah,
I mean, that is a man oozing with strength and confidence, and you just love it as a Brewers fan because you're watching a guy who not only is being considered this type of player, but he is oozing in confidence, but not arrogance. It's awesome. And we got to see him briefly when he came up to Milwaukee. And yeah, Pena was popping from the very beginning. He was a triples guy, which there's that speed. He was getting those triples, and so to get that OPS with 1 homer is incredible. I just thought was like, whoa. So yeah, both guys extremely excited. I think it's fair to say they're both starting in Carolina. We'll just put it there.
I have to
I'm
imagine.
99.9% assured they're not going complex.
No,
And so,
I mean, I think Made's there to start the season no matter what. I think Pena maybe does the extended spring before getting called up, like Churio did. But
that's
that
true. Yeah,
feels like the only way. Like, I don't see either of them playing for the complex league team
yeah.
before they play in Carolina.
Yeah, these
No.
are blue chip as it gets in terms of this type of
Yeah.
prospect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So moving to the next tier, then we had two other players who one performed really, really well in the field. One maybe not quite as much, but some really good things to take away from his season, and even more after we learned some extra stuff postseason from some Baseball America information that we got. But outfielder Jose Anderson, who he hit 8 homers. Unfortunately, and Joseph, you had a calendar going, I know, but he
Yeah.
didn't hit any for a while at the end of the season. He hit 8 real quick, but he showed massive power. This is a guy who signed for $60,000 in this last class. Just a really, really big under the radar pickup for the Brewers. And he showed, I mean, the type of power you don't see very often from an athletic outfielder. He's not expected to stick in center by most accounts. They think he's going to grow out of that a little bit. He's not the fastest guy in the world, but he's got a cannon of an arm. So right field is expected to be no problem for him. And really what we saw is a guy who he drew his walks. He hit 8 homers in only a 200 plate appearance span, really. And he pulls the ball in the air a lot. And those are really, really good qualities in a hitter. It was a 143 WRC plus. He was 15 of 19 on steals. Again, I don't think that's going to be a huge part of his game moving forward, but it shows an ability that he's at least a decent base stealer. The DSL steal numbers are always a little iffy as well. You never know what kind of holding runners you're getting out of pitchers. You don't know what kind of arms you're getting out of catchers, but just a ton to like with Anderson there. And I'll let you talk about Anderson before I move to the next guy, because I think we'll talk a little bit more about Quintana after that.
Yeah, I like as you pointed to I had that count. He did not hit a home run, I believe, from July 15th. July 15th? Yeah, July 15th through the end of the season. Off the top of my head. And I was mildly bummed, not in any other thing, other than like I was looking for records. But I mean, it didn't matter, right? Like he just if you recall back when the signing class first happened, Baseball America put him as a sleeper. Even though he had a low signing, they definitely were aware that he's a guy that is shown in-game power and contact. So, I mean, kudos to Baseball America. Hey, they kind of know what they're talking about, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that was one. So he was already on my radar as I had that in a kind of a
Yep.
sidebar there as the season started. So yeah, just a fantastic season. And
yeah,
in a system devoid of outfield depth of note at this point in time, he has a path. So that's pretty exciting.
We got a question about that from Daniel, actually. He said, outside of Braylon Payne, isn't low A Carolina's outfield wide open? Doesn't that give Jose Anderson a good shot to immediately seize a spot? I think it does. I think he's got a
like
very
that
real
guy
chance.
writing reports. It's amazing. Yeah.
But yeah, I think he and the other two are probably the most likely of this group to begin in low A Carolina next year. But another name that ended up being the highest bonus in last year's class was Jorge Quintana, a switch hitting shortstop as well. Now, the main thing here with Quintana is that he got off to a very slow start offensively. It was a struggle at first, and again, in a small sample, that can hold you down for a little while, just because there's not as much time to kind of make up for those numbers as you would over the course of a real full length season. But in the end, he still ended up being an above average hitter in the league. He had a 105 WRC plus. He walked at almost a 14% clip. OPS was 741. He had 2 homers. He had 3 triples and 14 doubles. So he showed signs of pop. And again, he's doing this from both sides. And the main thing I think that everyone learned kind of postseason really, but also in general, is that he made elite swing decisions. And we learned that from a Baseball America article kind of showing the general, all of the league, basically. It didn't give all the names, but they specifically pinpointed Quintana as being fantastic at swinging at strikes and laying off pitches out of the zone. The Brewers love that as a quality in general, which is probably part of the reason they targeted him and gave him as much money as they did. But the fact that you saw some pop, the fact that he came on late, and the fact that he apparently played fantastic defense at shortstop this year, it makes him a very legitimate prospect. And I think some people probably saw the stats for the season and kind of came away disappointed. I think he, despite underperforming relative to some of the other players we're going to talk about, all of these signs point to a guy that's got a very legitimate prospect path towards the major leagues potentially. What were your thoughts on Quintana, especially as we learned a little bit more as the season ended?
Absolutely echoing the same. Like, when you're writing the reports, like we do, the DSL is most definitely included. And, that was the one thing I noticed at the end of the year is he just picked up so much steam. And the DSL too, by the end of the season, they were the hotter team. And
Yeah.
that wasn't the case. And we have joked about it. And I mean, it's not really a joke. It's kind of truthful. If you swap out the pitching staffs, DSL2 might be in the playoffs. They were that potent. Their runs scored were almost the same, and you had Mate and Pena in the Uno.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Quintana, he just got hot, and you wondered at that point in time, oh my goodness, is this that kind of pedigree coming through in real time at the most important time of the season? Unfortunately, they were too many games back. If I recall correctly, Pittsburgh, it was the gold, whereas they had the DSL Orioles orange for the Uno.
Yep.
That we were neck and neck to the last week. But yeah, Quintana, and then to see that article on the swing decisions, ooh, I was stoked.
Yeah.
As an aficionado and kind of a guy who tracks all the players, I was like, okay, asterisk here, gold bar. This is fun. So I think the ACL is going to be really intriguing. And it's going to be fun because the ACL is going to start again earlier. So we'll get a nice little glimpse there. And maybe we see him in Carolina.
It's possible.
It could be sooner or later. And we'll get into that at the ACL because there's a couple players there that we know that are going to be vying for playing too. And again, that just gets into the immense amount of young infield depth that is in the Brewers system is insane. It's just crazy. It's awesome. It's awesome. So Quintana's like he came way on the radar at the end of this year. It's very exciting.
Yeah. And we've got another infielder in the next tier. We've got this one we called kind of MLB caliber tools with maybe a little bit more question surrounding them. And part of this is, for the first one we're going to talk about, he was a really low bonus guy. We don't know a ton about the defense so far, but Juan Ortuño had a 159 WRC plus this year.
Woo.
Really, really hit. It's a pretty compact type of swing. He's not the biggest guy, but he just hit all year, and he did it with, again, a better strike or a better walk rate than, or higher walk rate than strikeout rate. He had a 944 OPS. He was 22 of 29 on stolen bases, which that's a little bit more. You're getting caught a little bit more often than you'd like to see at the DSL. My guess is he's not the fastest, or at the very least, he's not the greatest base stealer right now. But he showed some pop to all fields, at least gap to gap. And yeah, he hit 3 homers, 3 triples, 6 doubles. Like there was a lot to like here. And the few reports we got on the defense are that they think he can just kind of be that utility type of guy who can play a bunch of different spots. Makes me wonder if maybe he's a candidate to move to the outfield to kind of start filling some of those open spots as we move forward. But based on what you know about Ortuño, any thoughts on him?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is that palm trees in the outfield. Wow, that's not happening out here. Ortuño, he reminded me so much just in movement style of Arenamo. He just he's compact, really active legs, clearly fluid, and so I'm really excited to see what kind of defensive capacity he has. And he does seem like a utility knife. The hitting, I mean, incredible. We just need to see he's a smaller guy. You never know what's going to happen is the increase in pitching competition. So but I mean, how can you not be excited about that type of year? It's
right. The next player, maybe not quite as much statistically to read into. Luis Corobo, a catcher. He got some like Jefferson Caro type of comps coming in because of his cannon of an arm. Guy had fantastic pop times as a 16-year-old. 1.9 pop times as a 16-year-old is pretty ridiculous. The main thing here is that he threw out runners at a crazy rate in the DSL. That is not a league that people throw out runners very well in, and he did it at an insane rate. And at the same time, yeah, go ahead.
Was it like 43%?
Yeah, it was in the mid 40s.
And the main thing that stood out was that there was a period of time for a significant portion, it was almost 50, and
Yeah.
it was like 20 some points better than any other catcher down there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's a cannon of an arm. It's probably even better pop times than what we saw before he signed at this point. And at the same time, the offense didn't show up how you would want it necessarily. It was a 96 WRC plus. He did hit 4 homers, showed some pop, which was kind of a thing that was known about him. He showed pop to all fields prior to signing, and he struck out at a very reasonable 14% clip. So the walks were a little lower than you'd want. He had a really, really low BABIP, but at the same time, he had a ton of grounders. So that's not super shocking. He's not super fast. But there's a lot to like here in the toolbox. I think there's pop and there's a crazy high defensive ceiling. And that gives you a chance to be a major league catcher. When you have that sort of defense, all you have to do is just kind of hold your own offensively to get an opportunity in the majors. So that's why we kind of look at them as like there are major league caliber tools here on the defensive side, especially, and then there's stuff to work with on the offensive side, and that gives you a pretty interesting ceiling. I have a feeling he's a guy who's also going to be coming. I would imagine he's going stateside and he's going to be playing in the ACL next year. But yeah, another very interesting player, and again, a guy signed in this most recent class. We haven't gotten to anyone yet. We will in a few minutes here, but anybody yet that signed 2 years ago. So these are all guys who are making their debuts, which is impressive in its own right. But anything to add on Corobo before we move to the next tier?
I mean, you just said it all. It's just there's that you don't see that type of defensive prowess at his age that often. You just don't. And the fact that you can put him legitimately in the same conversation as Jefferson Caro with already showing signs of something in the bat, that's a legitimate catching prospect. Period.
Oh, yeah.
End of story. So I'm just excited to see it. You know, I can't wait for him to be in Carolina. I'll be watching those games. It'll be fun.
Oh yeah. No, he'll be a fun one to watch for sure. I just want to see him throw out some guys and have some fun behind the plate, and then hopefully see a little pop.
I do find it pretty hilarious that the clip that Brewers PD has there. I think that base runner's safe.
Oh, I think that was too. I don't even think that was. I grabbed that from Kurt Hoag's, I think.
They're both
that one wasn't even from.
Yeah, that's a minor league out for you. Yeah, you're out.
Oh yeah. Yep, absolutely. Especially at that level. But yeah, we'll move to the next tier here, and we only have a couple videos left for the DSL hitters, so we'll just kind of run through some of these guys. But Handle Fry Encarnacion, which first of all, fantastic name, and I really want him to succeed for that reason. But he did some really good things this year, and I was able to find a little bit of video on him. I think I grabbed it from his TikTok actually. So it's kind of shot off of a computer screen, I think, but clean left-handed swing, quick bat. I know he had exit velocities of up to 107 as a young player in the DSL, so that's impressive. There's something here with the bat. It's a pretty quick swing. There's a little Hendry Mendez to the swing I see, but I also think he gets on plane a lot better than Mendez did. Like the lower half gives me Hendry Mendez vibes, but the actual swing itself in the plane of the swing looks a lot better to me. So he hit 2 homers. He started the season a little bit injured. He had some injuries that he dealt with, but he ended with a 106 WRC plus. But at the same time, he is in that same vein of like what I talked about with Kalen Nicasia too. He pulls the ball in the air a lot, and if you're putting up exit velos of up to 107 and pulling the ball in the air, there's going to be power at some point here. So good athlete, pretty good arm from what we've heard. There's not a ton out there on him. He didn't steal bases at a very high clip. But there's a lot to like as a potential like right field type of prospect, I think, here. So anything on Handle Fry?
Yeah, Handel Frey. He was leading off, setting the
Yeah.
table consistently for Mate and Pena. To me, that was telling. That's
Yep.
a lot of trust there. And I may be misremembering, but I'm almost certain that Baseball America also mentioned him.
They did.
So
Yep.
I think so he was injured, but he definitely did enough in my
Hmm.
mind through the game to game as the season progressed, where I was like, okay, there's probably something here. And the fact that you see that's a smooth stroke. I like it.
Oh yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
excited. Another player. I mean, this class is just filled with. I'm excited about this guy. I
Yeah.
don't think
No,
I've
it is
ever had. I mean, I can say
crazy.
I haven't. I've never felt this way about a Brewers International class. Like not even
No,
close.
it's an
Excited.
insane class. And continuing with that, we have Frandy LaFond, another fantastic name that I would really like to succeed just for that
Gold
reason. But
star name. Fun.
he has one of my favorite swings from this class. I
Yes.
just love the swing. He's got pretty big pop in the bat. He had a 134 WRC plus. Another guy who spent a little bit of time injured this year, but when he played, he just put up really solid results. He hit 3 homers, 5 doubles, a triple. The strikeouts are a little higher than you want in the DSL with 21%, but he walked at a 13% clip, which is good. And he's in the same vein. He pulls the ball in the air a lot. He was 15 of 19 on steals, so there's at least some pretty decent speed there. And if you're watching the video right now, you could see it on that triple he just hit. There's a lot of tools here, and this was actually one I got a little bit of a heads up on before the season to kind of pay attention to.
Yeah.
And he I believe he started the season injured, so he kind of
Yeah.
fell off the radar a little bit. But when he played, he was fantastic. Like I said, a 134 WRC plus is very, very solid and an impressive number to post. And he's another one who it's an outfielder, so that gives him a chance to move somewhat quickly, especially if you're putting up really good results. So he's one I'll be watching as well as like a under the radar type of quick mover to Carolina. That would not surprise me if the results keep showing up like they did here. But anything to add on for Andy?
No, you're right on. He was a late ad. Probably some injury there that we don't know about. But man, in
Yep.
the early part, even though that strikeout to walk rate kind of severed a little bit in the early part, it was extremely favorable. Like that's the thing that popped out for me when I was tracking the games and writing the reports. Is that my goodness, this guy's got 10 and 10. He's hitting the ball. He's hitting it hard and it's going places. We have something here. And then you see the video. Look at that frame. How can you
Oh
not
yeah.
love that bus he's running around with? Like that is a player. And
Yeah.
so yeah, and I remember we before the season you had mentioned that about LaFon, so I was tracking him, and he impressed from the get go, even though he was a late ad. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
But again, as
Yeah.
you say, another guy with the outfield, there's just a path there. And so I think a lot of these guys, if they hit the ground running, it's tricky. Then the addendum here to any of the fans listening is that you have to remember these are very short seasons. And
Yeah.
so if you're only playing 2 or 3 months, things can go awry and then it's hard to recover. So, you keep that in mind. So then when you catch lightning in a bottle like these guys do, it doesn't mean they're going to do it safe side right off the
Yeah.
bat. And so
Yep.
we hope it does, but we just don't know.
Yep. 100%. A couple other names here. Moises Polanco, infielder. No video out there that I could find, but another guy who posted really, really solid numbers. He had a 125 WRC plus. Another guy who pulls the ball a lot, stole a bunch of bases, and walked more than he struck out. So a really good combo there. And then Juan Martinez, who he didn't quite have the same results overall. He had a 95 WRC plus, but he struck out at a low rate. He walked at a similar rate to what he struck out. He had 5 triples, 6 doubles, and he was 15 of 16 on steals. I believe he was given some credit for his versatility as well as a player. So an interesting debut from him. Anything on either of those two before we move to our last tier here?
Yeah, I think honestly, for those two, I would just point you to Cheesehead's blog. He was on Juan Martinez in the middle of the season and reminded me, frankly, to look back at him because of his isometric he uses to qualify DSL guys. And
Yeah.
so visit his blog, really well put together, and it's a fun read. And he talks a little bit about Polanco and Martinez And I don't want to add anything more there because it's all right there. But yeah, I
Yep.
think that both various reasons they were intriguing enough. And despite the WRC plus being sub 100 for Martinez, there was a period of time there where he was neck and neck in the conversation of meeting these qualifications for him.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
he just kind of, if I recall correctly, I think he tailed off at the end of the season. I think that was one of
Yeah.
those things.
I think so.
And so, yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I would say to that.
Yeah. All right. So we've got a few other ones to note. I'm not going to go into too much detail on these guys. We are already pushing 2 hours on this thing. So
Woo!
and we have a lot left. But another utility guy in his second season here, Roderick Flores had a really good season, 132 WRC plus. Angel Paulino also had a above average WRC plus with some stolen bases mixed in. Kevin, I want to say it's Eru. I don't even know, but he was one of the bigger signings in the prior class. He had a 115 WRC plus. He came on late. He kind of seemed like he finally adjusted. Took him maybe a little bit longer than some others, but he had in the end, a solid season. Jonathan Ronhell, he had a 104 WRC plus. He is also a guy who kind of moved around the infield, and again, a second year guy. Frederi Montero, another infielder, kind of utility type. Again, more in this line, he was more bat to ball, showed some stolen base ability. He was a 94 WRC plus. And then Yuan Hel Saez, I believe, is how we're going to pronounce that one. He showed some pretty decent flashes, but we didn't quite get to see. Yeah, I was gonna say, okay, yeah, he only had 50 plate appearances this year, so it was a 95 WRC plus. He showed some extra base hit power. He had 2 triples and a double, but he did not really have the opportunity to show a ton. But again, low strikeout rate, and also it looks like he pulled almost everything, and a lot of it was on the ground. So we'll have to see how that one works out. But there are some interesting traits there, and yeah, we'll be paying attention to all these guys. I would imagine the majority of that list we were just talking about will be moving stateside in some capacity next year. I think from that bottom tier, you could see a couple of them potentially stick around. But I would imagine the ones who have already been there for 2 are unlikely to do so. But moving forward with some other DSL players and people to watch, we do have a big list of pitchers to watch. We have some information on a few of them. We'll quickly go through these guys. That we should note that, like, DSL pitching, it's even harder to glean any information from even stats and stuff. But also there's just a big lack of information on stuff. And for pitchers at the lower levels, stuff honestly is probably as important, other than like elite command. If you show fantastic command, you throw a bunch of strikes, that's going to be a good sign for you. But if you're just kind of in the middle, it's really hard to say, like, does he have really good stuff, or is he just kind of, hanging around doing some decent things? But one guy we do know has really, really interesting stuff is left-handed pitcher Wandy Torres. Guy who was, if you remember Angel Perdomo, you're kind of looking at his clone, just quite a bit younger than Angel at this point. But Torres is a mid-90s fastball already, up to 98 at times. Really, really big frame. And a guy who I think if you watch the delivery, you see the Perdomo, but you also see a little bit of like the Jared Koenig type of delivery, where I think if you watch it, you might think he's not getting as much as he could out of his legs, but I actually think he rotates as well as just about anybody you'll watch. So there's where the velo is coming from. I don't really think he's going to be able to just move faster and suddenly throw even harder. I think he's pretty much getting what he can out of his body right now. And as he continues to mature, he's a guy who could touch triple digits from the left side with a really interesting breaking ball. He's thrown a few changeups as well. It's a really interesting profile for a guy, especially his height at 6 foot. Well, he's listed at 6'3", but I don't know if I buy that compared to how he looks on video compared to most of the other players. But it's a big bodied dude who already moved his way up to the Arizona League. He didn't pitch in the complex league, but he was moved stateside, which meant they wanted to get him looks. They wanted to get him opportunities to pitch in the United States at the end of the season, which is notable. I think he was a guy who was injured early in the season and came back and just really dominated the DSL when he finally got his opportunity. I mean, he struck out hitters at a 53% clip in his 15 and 2/3 innings. And yeah, he pretty much dominated once he got the opportunity down there. So that's probably the top guy here, but there are some other interesting pitchers to talk about as well. We'll go through some other ones. Fabian Reyes, don't know a ton about him, but he had a solid season. Oliver Camilo was actually the Brewers DSL All-Star Game pitcher. I think all of that was partially just due to timing and, when guys are available and stuff, just like the MLB All-Star Game. But he had a really solid season. I mean, he had a 1.8 ERA. The thing with him was that he didn't strike many hitters out. And he's a heavy fly ball pitcher, which if you don't strike guys out and you give up a lot of fly balls, that to me points to a potential homer issue down the road. But interesting stuff from him. I've been able to catch a little video of him. It's like a low 90s fastball with a breaking ball. Don't know all of the pitches he throws or anything. But again, he had a solid season, so hard to knock him for too much here. Dariel Jaquez had another pretty solid season overall. It's like a lot of these guys in the Dominican League. It's just a matter of, throwing enough strikes. What kind of stuff do you have? And he was solid this year. I can't remember if I'm trying to figure it out. Was he a first year or a second year DSL guy? I want to say he was a second, but either way. Yeah,
I think he is second year. Let me check. I could be. There's sometimes those names get blurred. Let's see.
Yeah. Nope, he was a first year guy, it looks like. And yeah, he posted a 1.74 ERA. So again, strikeouts were less than 1 per inning, which is always kind of a sure sign of a legit pitching prospect, is when you're putting up strikeout numbers that are better than 1 per inning. But the walk numbers were reasonable, especially for a DSL guy at 4.65 per 9. That'll have to get better as he progresses, but clearly some stuff to work with here. Right-handed pitcher Manuel Moreno had a pretty solid season as well. Another guy who, on the surface, 4.0 ERA, 7.75 strikeouts per 9. But on the flip side of what a lot of these guys have, he only walked 1.5 per 9. And that is impressive in the DSL. That's something you don't see from a lot of these guys. And yeah, I mean, he's one to watch strictly because he throws strikes, and a lot of people his age in that league don't. So you got to keep an eye on him. Saul Sanchez was in his second year, but he also posted a 1.74 ERA. Again, strikeouts were under 1 per inning, 7.4 per 9 to be exact. He walked 4 per 9, but he limited runs. And I mean, that's always notable. Obviously, there's also defensive stuff that we factor in here, and he did have half of his runs were unearned. So you never know if he was putting himself in trouble and then getting bailed out with an error in a way. As weird as that sounds, but statistically, you can get bailed out with an error. But he posted really solid numbers. Wandy Cabrera had a 2.05 ERA. Again, too many walks, not enough strikeouts, but at least someone to keep an eye on. Right-handed pitcher Paul Hoff. I know that, Joseph, you enjoy Paul Hoff mostly because of where he's from and what he could potentially bring in terms of a different type of player in the DSL compared to what we normally see.
I mean, you got to give credit to a German, a large German hanging out in the tropics all summer. I mean, right off the bat, I mean, you're dealing with losing body weight left and right. Probably sunburning. So yeah, all kidding aside, no, I mean, he had a decent season. I mean, it wasn't like eye popping, but I think like in terms of like a cultural, like if we're talking like when the DSLers come stateside and the language barrier kind of thing potentially, well, I think it's just as a thing for a German coming to the Dominican into an all Spanish dialect area, and then in a complex with a bunch of young Spanish-speaking individuals. I think that's an immense accomplishment. But also back to the market inefficiencies, I don't think a lot of teams are targeting the Bundesliga for their arms, and so or their catchers. Shout out to Yannick. So yeah, I just think it's fun. We have Venezuela and Nicaragua, as we already know that they go down into those areas, which are not as prolific, and now Germany. I think that's fascinating. So yeah, I
Yeah.
hope we get to see it stateside, if nothing else, to see a large German throw, a baseball. There you have it. That's my take.
Absolutely. Moving forward, we have Carlos Morera, right-handed pitcher. He's already 19 now. He spent most of the year as a 19-year-old. 3.68 ERA, struck out almost 1 per inning. So solid there, but walked 5 per 9. But again, solid overall numbers. So one to at least pay attention to. Allende Bravo, we have a little bit of video for him after some solid DSL outings. He's a guy who was, from what I could pick up from some of the video I found, again, kind of a low 90s arm, but he throws multiple pitches. He's got a really nice curveball. He's shown a pretty solid changeup. And I think he's throwing a slider as well. It's kind of hard to tell on some of these, but I believe he's throwing 4 pitches. So interesting arm here. And he posted really, really solid numbers. He had a 2.38 ERA. Walks were very reasonable at 3.18 per 9. And he spent the whole year as a 17-year-old. So whenever you actually put up solid results as a 17-year-old as a DSL pitcher, it's always notable. But yeah, Bravo had a really good season. Carlos Cara had a really solid season. He posted a 1.66 ERA with 11.22 strikeouts per 9. Again, as a 17-year-old, he just turned 18, it looks like yesterday, actually. But on that note, he did strike out or walk almost 7 per 9. So there were still some issues there. Wenderlin King had a really, really solid season. We have a little bit of video for Wenderlin. But he's one of the guys who he showed, again, kind of that low 90 stuff, but a really good ability to throw the changeup. He had a 10 strikeout game against the Padres DSL team. One of the highest numbers of anybody in the DSL this year because they don't normally go deep enough into games. Good curveball, solid changeup, like I said, and then the fastball seems to have a little bit of ride, even though it's not thrown super hard. So King is another one I think you got to keep a pretty close eye on. Then you have Joshua Quezada, who is one that we actually acquired for Clayton Andrews last offseason. And I know, Joseph, you have some thoughts on Quezada. I'm going to pull up some video here for him, but just another righty, pretty interesting stuff across the board. And I know you got a little bit of inside info on this too. So what do you know about Quezada?
Yeah, we have I guess a close family friend who's in the Yankees org, and so from time to time I get, like, for instance, when we first got Blake Perkins, I had made mention of the fact that the Yankees were quite high on him, and he had shown a lot of improvements, but it was just a numbers game, and so that I think we had a better player than potentially people realized. Because if you remember, at that time, people weren't all that excited about it,
No.
and they should have been. No, with Quezada, yeah, and so it was kind of a similar thing where they saw it as a sacrifice they wanted to make to add a lefty, a kind of a 4A lefty that could potentially make an impact. Unfortunately, it didn't go well for Clayton. But yeah, I think when you look at Quezada, what's interesting about him is that he reminds me so much of Carlos F. Rodriguez. His entire way, his pre-pitch setup, and even the way he throws the ball. And so he clearly has tools as well, and he has size. And so when I saw the highlights and when I talked with our friend, I just was very intrigued. And I think his season, he didn't fall off at all. And I think I saw subtle differences from what he was executing and how he was executing with the Brewers than he was with the Yankees in the videos I was afforded to watch outside of certain clips on like a Reddit or YouTube. I was given a couple other things just as a gesture. And so he's an intriguing guy. I think honestly, after Wandy Torres, out of the pitchers I've been able to see, he's probably the pitcher I'm most excited about. And
Yeah.
with the addendum that I don't really ever get excited about the DSL guys because you just don't know. And that goes back to Aspriel Mugallon when that lefty who was so good. And I think he was voted the DSL pitcher of the year. He just couldn't make it work. It's just such a challenge from the stateside. So, yeah, but I think there's a lot to like there. So it'll be intriguing to see what happens next year.
Yeah. And then 3 last names, Argenis Aparicio had a 2.81 ERA. Lonell Downs had a 3.86 ERA, struck out close to a batter an inning. And then Christopher Peralta, 4.21 ERA. He struggled a little bit late in the season. He got off to a pretty good start, but he struggled as the season progressed. Only struck out about 7 per 9, but he is related to Freddie Peralta. So he's his cousin. Cool little story there. And it's cool to see. There was a little bit of video at one point that I was able to find. I can't find it anymore, but there's a little bit of Freddie to the delivery. You can absolutely see that he took a little bit of Freddie into his delivery, and he's an athletic mover on the mound. So not the greatest statistically, but given he's only 17 and a half right now, he turned 17 during the DSL season. And he showed good signs at certain times. I think he's one to watch. And obviously, I think there is value to having that family pedigree and just knowing a little bit more about how the journey's going to go. So anybody who knows somebody who, or specifically a family member who's gone through this journey, probably has a little bit of an advantage knowing what's upcoming and being able to talk to them and have that type of relationship with them where they can kind of feel it out and say like, hey, what's going to happen here? What happens if I struggle? What happens when all these things happen? So yeah, that's the whole DSL. We'll move on to the complex league here, starting with our tiers on the position side. Now, the interesting part here is that the majority of the guys we're going to talk about, or at least at the top of our tier list, all moved on to Carolina at some point. And so we're not going to go into a ton of detail on some of these guys because we just don't want to end up, we're going to talk about them more in the Carolina episode that we're doing soon. But we'll talk about all of them. This one, unlike the DSL, we didn't have necessarily a superstar potential one tier, but we did have one player in a star potential, and that was Eric Batanti, drafted in the 2023 draft, which everyone knows was quite the draft, especially just from the offset. And Batanti, the main thing here is that he possesses power that very, very few people his age do. And it's power to all fields. It is power. I mean, he hit homers that on the video, if you're watching the video right now, to left field that like you haven't seen lefties do since like Prince Fielder. Like it looks like a pop-up to left field and then it's gone. That just doesn't happen very often from people who are 18. Like he spent pretty much the entire season. I think he's maybe just turned 19, like very, very recently. But this is a young dude with major power. And again, it's to all fields, and he's shown an ability to handle at least a couple different defensive positions. I don't know how confident I am in the third base, but I think there's a chance he can at least help at third base and that he would be a solid first base defender. But in the ACL, that dude he mashed, and then we'll talk about it in the Carolina one, but that didn't stop. When he got to Carolina, he still showed a ton of power. There's swing and miss concerns and all of that, but he had a 104.8 90th percentile exit velocity as an 18-year-old. Like I talked about how crazy Mades is, but Tanti's basically in line with it. It would have been 81st percentile for AAA, and he's 18. So huge power. I know he got some Kobe Mayo comps, and I know Brewer fans know Kobe Mayo because everyone wanted him in the Corbin Burns trade. So he has that type of potential down the line. Anything on Batanti? Again, I already said a lot.
I'm going to say the majority for Carolina. However, I think the other thing that's important to note here just right now is that his swing decisions are sound. And so not only does he have an immense power kit, like, I mean, is a man-child and hits absolute moonshots, but he makes good decisions. So he's not chasing. Rare combination. Yep. And so, I'll just say
much so. Yeah. In the next tier, which we kind of called, again, our MLB caliber tools, we have Josh Adamszewski, and he is another infielder. So again, as we're going to get through with some of these guys, we have a lot of infield depth at the lower levels, and it's going to be interesting to watch these guys battle it out. But this is another lefty bat, another really compact, quick swing with some legitimate juice behind it from the left side. And at the same time, I think he's got a very good approach. I think he's got an ability to take and read pitches well. And it's a quick swing that he can turn on it and do damage, but he can also just hit line drives and pepper the ball around the field. And I won't even touch on the defense because, again, I'm going to take all the stuff from the Carolina one if I keep talking. But yeah, there's a lot to like with Adam Shevsky as well. And yeah, it's like I said, I don't know what they're going to do with all this infield depth. It almost makes you wonder if there's going to have to be some trades at some point in the near future just to make sure people have space to play. But Adam Shevsky is one of my personal favorites. I liked him the moment I saw his swing from some PBR video after they drafted him. He is another day 3 high school pick for a low signing bonus, committed to Ball State. And they found a guy here who looks like a legitimate prospect that you need to pay attention to. And then we have yet another infielder next on our list in the same category, Filippo Dituri. A little bit different for him. There's not much pop there. It is very, very hit over power. But good bat to ball skills, elite swing decisions according to Baseball America. Just does not chase, but he is going to need to show more pop in the bat, I think, at some point. At least the ability to hit it somewhat hard. It doesn't have to be homers. It needs to be line drives, but you got to see some pop. It kind of reminds me of where Luis Lara was a couple of years ago, but even probably a little bit less juice in the bat than what Lara was showing at this time. But a very, very solid defender at multiple infield spots. And he just has a lot of the tools that teams like, and the Brewers especially value swing decisions a lot right now. And he fits that bill really well. So he's another one that you got to keep an eye on. And he did end up in Carolina. The results were not quite the same as they were in the ACL, but he showed some really good things. And we'll see. He'll probably be making a repeat at Carolina next year. But anything on those two before we move to the next two here?
Yeah, just real quickly, you know how I feel about Adam Shevsky. Really like the player. Really love the. And we'll get into it more in the Carolina episode, but I do his form and his compactness and his strength. It reminds me of Biggio. It just does, like that build. I'm not saying anything about the players. I'm just saying like the build type. And then the good thing about talking about Dituri and the ACL is in the ACL he was fantastic. Can't say the same in Carolina, and we'll talk about that when we get there. So,
yep. All right, moving again to the MLB caliber tools with some questions here. And honestly, Dituri could probably fit into that just because of where the bat is. But Tyler Rodriguez, this video came from Prospects Worldwide, who, by the way, does by far the best job of covering the ACL. Pretty much the only people who are consistently there and getting solid video. But Rodriguez, I just really like his swing whenever I see it. I think there's like a really nice line drive on plane early type of swing. And the results were pretty solid. This is a guy who not many people talked about all year, but he just performed the entire season. 130 WRC plus. He walked more than he struck out. He had 9 of 10 stolen bases. Like he did again spend a little bit of the time hurt this year. But by the people who were there, think he could probably at least hold his own at short and play pretty much any infield position. There's an interesting player here. I think more than anything, along with Dituri, there's a concern about the lack of power. He did hit 1 homer, but only 4 doubles. Just not a ton of pop to go with Rodriguez. And then for Edgardo Ordonez, I think the main thing with him is that he showed a really, really solid bat for a catcher. And I think the concern with him is probably he did not throw many people out. We talked about it earlier. There are other circumstances that can factor in because, pitchers at that level might not be good at holding runners. There's a lot of things that happen here, but his percentage was so low that it's a concern. You have to wonder if he can even hold his own as a catcher with that type of arm. And on the same note, he is already 21 now. He was 20 all season playing in the ACL, so a little bit older for the level. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot to like with the bat. He posted a 124 WRC plus. He hit 7 homers as a catcher, like a lot to like there. But you got to figure out if he can actually catch. That's going to be the main thing. I think we'll find out probably next year because he will most likely I would have to imagine as a 21-year-old be at least the second catcher at Carolina next year. So anything on those two before we move to the others of note?
Yeah, just a little bit. Really like Tyler Rodriguez's form, and just like you can see the athlete, and so it's an interesting player. And again, like you're saying, not a lot of people talk about him. There's a lot of guys like that in the Brewer system, and I just think obviously I've been tracking him, and I'm really intrigued to see that whole mix, and we'll get into it in the Carolina. But what is going to happen this early season about placements? It is a really interesting storyline that is going on
Yeah.
between ACL, low A, and high A. There's just a melting pot of talent. So I'll be fascinated to see where Tyler ends up, as well as this person we'll talk about in a little bit, Alastre. And Ordonez, yeah, I mean, when you're only throwing out 11% of guys, that's
Yeah.
I mean, that's really bad. It's really so. I don't know what's going to happen there. Is he going to become DH first base, but work him into the catcher? I don't know. The Brewers tend to be pretty patient with that. They tend to give guys long leashes in their development behind the dish. But yeah, the bat, boy, if you could combine Ordonez with Carobo, you'd be like an Ivan Rodriguez level of talent potentially. But that's not the case. So
not yet. Science hasn't gotten there yet.
yeah, right.
Moving to the last one, others of note, we have Luis Lameda. This is a guy, 84 WRC plus, like tons of walks, 23% walk rate, which is crazy. Little too many strikeouts too. Did not show really any pop. He hit one homer, but that was pretty much it. Only one double outside of that. But at the same time, he hit a bunch of line drives. He has some pretty decent speed, but he's not a great base stealer. But the main thing with him is that he's said to be a very, very solid defender at a bunch of positions. So a guy who could play shortstop, but also could very easily move around the infield. There's stuff to work with here. I think there's a matter of like, can we get stronger? Can we kind of see these line drives actually turn into hits or doubles at least? Because the defense and the overall swing and everything gives them a little bit of something to work with. And then Luyin Alastre, I believe is how we're going to pronounce that one. Another infielder, another guy who had a really solid run for a little bit, but really struggled as the season progressed. Ended up with an 80 WRC plus on the season, but he didn't strike out much. He's a switch hitter with an ability to, poke the ball in gaps. He hit 2 homers. And again, another guy who's expected to be a pretty solid defender at a bunch of spots. So there's stuff to like with Alastre as well. But it was a really big, like, streaky season for him. He started crazy hot. Or I should say, I think he started a little slow and then he had a really, really good stretch and then he finished cold again. So either way, an interesting guy. I would imagine a repeater in the ACL. Like I would imagine the guys we're about to go through are probably all at least starting next year back in the ACL. But a really interesting guy. Again, another switch hitting shortstop. The Brewers have clearly, at least if they aren't targeting them, they seem to be picking up a lot of them in the last couple of international classes. So something that they seem to put some value on. Gary Holguin. I don't know if I saved the video that I was supposed to save of him. Let me check. But here we go. He's a guy who showed pretty big pop at different points throughout the season. There is positional versatility, I guess. I don't know how confident they are that he can actually handle the infield, but he seems like a guy who could handle the outfield, and I think there's a legit bat here. Again, he ended up with a 76 WRC plus, but it's a guy who hit a ton of line drives, didn't hit many grounders, pulled the ball a lot, showed power. He had 13 doubles, 2 triples, and 4 homers. Like in the swing, I think there's maybe a little bit too much head movement when I watch it. Like he's moving. I could see it causing the strikeout issues that he had, which it was pretty high rate, 28%. But there's also a lot to like with his swing, and you can see how the power would come from it. So he's an interesting one. Again, I would have to imagine a repeater, but being that he plays some outfield, it might give him a chance to get a start in Carolina next year. And then Johan Berrios was another one. signed in the same class as Gregory Berrios, who was traded, as we talked about. He was a pretty big signing at the time for the Brewers, just hasn't ever fully found his footing, but he had a solid season this year. He had a 111 WRC plus, 3 homers. The strikeout rate was decent, 23%. It had been a bit higher before. Walk rate was pretty good at 15%. And another guy who hits a bunch of line drives. Interesting profile. Have a hard time believing he can play third base, as Joseph might point out in a second here. Probably a first baseman long term. But yeah, anything on those 4 before we move to the pitching?
Yeah, I mean, I like Holguin's frame quite a bit. He looks like an athlete. It has a little bit of pop. You can see it. You can see it, and the fact that, like you were mentioning, the fact that he can potentially go to corner outfield spots, that carries weight in terms of the utility usage there and finding ABs for him if he is to move up because of the lack of depth there. But yeah, Barrios. Yeah, I don't think you can really. I mean, it's hard to say. Obviously, I mean, the defensive numbers from the ACL, you never really know how accurately they represent the player. However, when a guy's getting a 78% fielding percentage, that's not very ideal, especially when he's doing very well at first base. But the real story there was that he had a decent season, and that's good. That's a good thing. He reclaimed some of his status. I'd be very surprised if he isn't in Carolina at some point early in the year. And Lastra, I still continue to think that there's something interesting there. Maybe it's false hope based in the DSL season. And but yeah, he faded, and that was, sad face. However, he's going to have an opportunity. I would imagine he'll start in the ACL. Given the immense amount of depth and yeah, so if there's a guy out of that list where I'm like, I don't think he would probably be lower. Lameda and Alastro will probably carve their tenure in the complex. There's nothing wrong with that.
No.
So yeah, we'll see what happens.
Moving to the pitching side, we did have a question here from Snoogans 8056. He asked, we've drafted roughly 10 high school pitchers in the last 2 years. Any updates on any not named Letson or Noth? We'll talk about those 2 guys in the next episode. But there are a couple names that we actually know something about. Hayden Robinson, I mentioned earlier, coming off the IL because he had an elbow surgery. He was off to a fantastic start. He had gone 18 and 2/3 innings with a 2.41 ERA, striking out over 13 per 9. Just really, really good stuff from him. What you could see from him in the video that's showing here is the breaking ball and the changeup. Really, really good breaking ball, really solid changeup. But the thing that's harder to pick up on is the fastball. It's only thrown in the upper 80s, low 90s currently, but from a pretty small frame, not a huge dude, he gets 7 feet of extension on the fastball, which is really, really high. Like I talked about, that was Nick Merkles, and Merkles a much bigger guy than Hayden Robinson. Robinson shows a lot to like. He was in the zone consistently, and he supposedly throws a curve, but the people who've seen him say it's the exact same as the slider and velo, and maybe it's just slightly different in movement. So it's really one breaking ball. But they all graded out fantastically, and they also performed really well in his sample. Unfortunately, we probably won't see him for a while, but really, really good start to Hayden Robinson's career. Bjorn Johnson, on the other hand, struggled really, really bad with walks this year. He had an 8.38 ERA in his 19 1/3. He's kind of a low 90s fastball. He has a cutter and a slider and a changeup. The changeup was always seen as his best pitch in high school, but he apparently struggled to command it pretty bad in the ACL this year. Really young lefty with some interesting stuff. I would keep an eye on him, but nothing to, you don't want to bank on anything from him. I think Robinson is the one to note more than anyone from this group. And then the other high schooler that we've actually seen pitch professionally so far is Justin Chambers. However, he did not pitch for the Brewers. He pitched in the Dodgers organization as he was traded for Brian Hudson, which I think all Brewer fans are very okay with given the production they got out of Brian Hudson. And then the 2024 high school pitchers, we just didn't end up seeing any of them pitch. I've talked about Lavonis not signing many times. That was unfortunate. That was a really, really nice pick if they were able to bring him in. But Bryce Message, we did not see. Pretty good chance we'll see him early in 2025. I'll be curious if they give him the Letson and Noth treatment and move him to low A right away, or if he does ACL. I think that'll say a bit about what they view him as currently, because I think there's going to be some openings for innings in Carolina again. But we will likely see him, Griffin Tobias, Ethan Dorchees, and Tyler Renz at some point in 2025, whether it's in the ACL or Carolina or both. And then Joey Broughton, who's maybe my favorite pick outside of Lavonis, a day 3 pick, lefty pitcher with crazy, crazy stuff. He's likely to miss all of next season, if not maybe make it back for the very, very tail end of the year. He also is coming off of Tommy John surgery. So that's a little update on the pitchers from that particular, group, the high schoolers the last couple of years. But Joseph, why don't you talk about, before we go through all these other pitchers here, kind of what the environment was and how the Brewers as a staff performed pitching wise in the ACL?
Yeah, it was rough. It was rough. But real quickly, just the Hayden Robinson thing, the thing that I had mentioned to you before we recorded, is that the thing that's so intriguing about him is that he can come back door, front door in any hitter.
Yeah.
And you don't see that. You just don't. Like, having movement profiles that go swooping both directions, that's a little bit of a unicorn. It exists, obviously. People do it, but boy, that's pretty intriguing. There's nobody else in the Brewers system right now that does that. So it's typically one direction. And his that's significant movement. So that's really fun. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, but the pitching, we'll just run it through here real quick. There were only 4 games under, which is incredible again. But worst whip, worst batting average against, third most walks, third most hit batters, fourth most home runs allowed, gave up 27 more earned runs than any other team in the ACL. Next was the Cubs. So gave up a lot of runs. They were only 10 of 29 in save oppos. That's not going to get it done. And they allowed 6.55 runs per 9 innings. So as a whole, they just really didn't put it together pitching wise down the ACL. And so that's, we won the championship the year prior. We had a lot of guys come over that were young from the Dominican, and it was a transition and it was rough. But the good thing is that we'll get to in our next episode is that most of the guys to a T improved their numbers immeasurably when they went up a level. Mm-hmm. So you can't complain about that, but you can ponder what went on in the desert. And I wasn't there, obviously, to see it, so I don't know. But yeah, as you go through these guys on this list, geez, the vast majority ended up in Carolina, if not all of them. Yeah, all of them. It's like looking at them like off the top of my head, I'm like, boy, those are all in Carolina staff. So hopefully they continue on in Carolina, because to a man, like a prime example is right off the bat here. You're looking at Anthony Flores. He was fantastic for Carolina. So yeah, let's just hope that stays the course. But it certainly is a question mark coming into the next season. Can they keep it?
Yeah. And on these guys, for that reason, I'm going to list these guys off, but we're not going to go into much detail on the majority of them. We're going to talk about a good chunk of them in the next episode. And again, we are at the 2.5 hour mark. So I think we bit off a little bit more than we could have chewed, or we should have chewed. But you know what? We're gonna swallow it, and we're gonna get through it. So yeah, on the left-handed pitching side, we have Jesus Flores, Anthony Flores, who you just mentioned, Jesus Broca, which is funny. You've got 2 Floreses and 2 Jesuses, and they're all lefty in that first group there. Anthony Reyes, another lefty. I talked about Bjorn Johnson. We already talked about Wandy Torres, and we put a little asterisk next to him on the graphic because he never actually pitched in the ACL, but it was pretty much assumed that he was an ACL pitcher at the end of the year. He pitched in like instructs and those types of things in Arizona. We had Hayden Robinson. We also had Brian Rivera, who actually didn't pitch super well in the ACL, but again, in line with what Joseph was just saying, his first appearance in the at Carolina, he ended up going 6 shutout with 9 strikeouts and 1 walk and only 2 hits. Just an incredible first start. He showed good stuff. He's already up to like 94 I saw on the gun at some of these games. So there's something here with Brian Rivera. I think he's one of the other guys I would pay close attention to as a guy who could actually be a starter too. I think a good chunk of these guys are probably relievers down the road. There might be a few starters in there, but Rivera stands out as a guy that I think could at least continue starting down the road. Right-handed pitcher Melvin Hernandez, 17-year-old, by the way, for most of the season, did really, really well. Eric Prado ended up getting hurt at the end of the year, but he's got a really good breaking ball. Eniel Cortez, another really, really young player, at one point the youngest pitcher in Carolina, or in his league at low A, did pretty well when he made the move. Dikembe Sanchez, another guy we talked about, who actually ended up making it to high A by the end of the season, did really, really well at his stops. And then Jose Nova, who was another one who performed a lot better in Carolina. So a bunch of guys here, really, really interesting names. But again, we're going to dive more into them. Just wanted to make sure we get them out there, as they were pretty much the ones from the ACL. And we do have one question that we'll answer here from Cheesehead in QC before we sign off on this very long podcast. Asking about the ACL team. He asked, while there were definite bright spots, the ACL season also produced a fair amount of struggles for the youngest team in the league. Is there anyone who you are still optimistic on despite mediocre or poor numbers there last year? I'll just kick it off with one. I do like Alastre. I think there's something there. I know the organization likes him and has liked him for a while. Same with Lameda, but even to a higher degree with Alastre. And I've been a big Tyler Rodriguez fan. He didn't really have poor numbers, so he doesn't fit the description. But I think just in terms of attention, he doesn't really get it. And I think there's a legitimate prospect there in Tyler Rodriguez. So those would be my answers. There's probably more pitchers to pick from here, but again, I think we want to stick with most of those guys for Carolina. But Joseph, who would you pick for that answer?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the single player for me, in terms of like, boy, that was a disappointing season, but I'm still like, I wonder what's really going on there. Pedro Ibarguen.
Yeah.
That's a guy who just was phenomenal for what we can glean from, boxes and statistical profiles in the DSL the season prior. He just really he hit a patch of dryness in the desert, to put it lightly. Like, it was a really rough season. And again, short season, so you don't know what's going on. And like the pitchers, you don't know what they're working on. And if it could have been a transitional thing. It could have been he just got in a slump and couldn't get out of it. Not enough games to do that. I don't know. But I still am curious about what's going on. Well, what do we have here? Do we have a player? And I hope we do. So that would be the one guy for me where I'm like, And then a guy who didn't play, Demetrio Nadal. I'm just curious, what do we have here stateside? We haven't even seen him stateside. Is he healthy? He was taken off the inactives. Was that just procedural? I don't know. So, yeah, I would just start and end there. That would be mine.
Yeah. Perfect. All right. Well, this has been a long one, but we covered a lot on this one. The next few are we don't have a whole off-season worth of moves to talk about, in-season moves to talk about. We don't have to review the whole season for every team. So this is our mega episode, but we will be back. But not mega, MEJGA episode. And we will be back with rundowns on the rest of the system over the next month or so. We'll be doing them every week or so, kind of as we can fit it into the schedule around the regular pod and everything else going on in our lives. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this very long episode. If you need to listen to it in chunks, well, actually, I can't tell you this. This is the end of it. You're already here, so I can't tell you how to listen to this. But I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully you learned something from us, and we obviously had a lot of fun doing it because we just kept talking. So thank you all for listening. We will be back next time. Before you go, if you want to follow, first of all, if you're not signed up on brewerfanatic.com, sign up on brewerfanatic.com, get yourself an account, participate in the minor league forums or the major league forums or wherever. We always welcome more people, especially if you're listening to all of this. You probably will enjoy the minor league forums because it's basically this in written form. But yeah, check that out. Follow me on Twitter at smichaelis234. The podcast account is at BF_pod. Joseph, do you have anything you want to plug or anything anywhere people should follow you?
Yeah, you're not going to find me other than forums. I am one of those rare birds who doesn't do the social media. My farming life does not afford it. But if you watch me with the minor leagues, I certainly spend a lot of time there.
Yes.
However, I would also just say, just to let people know how it's going to go, is we're going to cover each single team in depth. So our next episode will be solely focused on the Mudcats, which is a very fun team to talk about. And then obviously we'll go to the Timber Rattlers, and we'll cover the Shuckers. And if we can make it through that, we'll go to the Sounds. And so that's going to be our layout. But man, so much fun to talk with you. As you know, we are both diehards, and the minor leagues, it's chess, I'm telling you. And I joke with you about this, but minor leagues in Major League Baseball organizational development is chess to a lot of pro sports checkers. It just is. There are so many players, so many moving parts. So anyhow, it's fun to talk about the players with you.
Yeah. And I should say, you are the one person I will always give the credit for watching more MiLB TV than I do. I think there might be another one. We've got Lucas on Brewer Fanatic
Lucas
and on
is right
too.
there.
I think I might have to give him the title now too. I just didn't have enough time this year to watch as much as you guys did. But
you're a busy man. You're a busy man. Yeah.
But yeah, no, he knows what he's talking about, and it was really fun doing this. So we will see you next time. And again, hopefully you all enjoyed this.